Piero is startled to hear that the protagonist is Pagma's successor. He asks if it's true, and Grid confirms, clarifying that he is also a duke. Drawing his sword, Piero expresses that a duke from a small kingdom is nothing special compared to the Saharan Empire, the pinnacle of power on the Western continent. However, he mentions that things are different because Grid is Pagma's successor, so he decides to see for himself if the protagonist is worthy enough to be his knight. He clarifies that they are not enemies and thinks Piero is a psychopath for wanting to fight. Drawing his sword, Grid decides to end this quickly and will definitely turn Piero into his knight. The swordsman delivers a powerful strike that Grid can barely block. Piero recalls that Pagma was a blacksmith who became the greatest swordsman after the death of the Sword Saint. If Piero has a battle with his successor, he would be able to see the difference between their skills and Pagma's. Piero praises the protagonist's great sword, and Grid responds that the NPC's sword isn't bad either, but he should fix it. Piero makes an unexpected move and exclaims that the weapon is not important, causing Grid to almost drop his sword. Even with superior strength stats, the protagonist is losing a power battle due to technique. Piero makes a quick leg movement to unbalance the protagonist. Grid stumbles and curses, managing to block a kick from Piero before it lands, but the combination of attacks is insane. There is no time interval between each of his techniques. Piero exclaims that it is horrifying and begins to doubt whether Grid lied about being Pagma's successor, or perhaps Pagma's level was very low. The protagonist doesn't care if they speak ill of Pagma, but he will not tolerate insults. Then, he activates Pagma's sword dance, using the binding skill and prepares to show his power to Piero. However, unexpectedly, the swordsman is able to block all the cuts with agile movements. Grid cannot believe that the guy blocked 21 strikes with just a few movements, thinking it could be due to Piero's great agility. The latter questions Grid if this is all he has. Thinking about investing more stat points in agility in the future, Grid responds that the swordsman would regret his words if he showed all his abilities, then uses the binding skill on the swordsman to immobilize him. Piero does not understand why his body cannot move, and Grid strikes him, surprising Piero, who did not expect this. Then, the protagonist uses the wave skill, and Piero manages to protect himself from taking too much damage but realizes he is being slowed down by this skill. Grid thinks that with his combo of binding followed by killing, he would secure victory in a PvP confrontation, but he wouldn't want to leave a scar on someone with such remarkable talent. Then, Piero sheathes his sword and mentions that he lost the confrontation, clarifying that Grid's sword is full of consideration for his opponent and that Piero cannot face a sword that is not imbued with the intent to kill. Grid asks Piero if he is right and reasons that the NPC could have used his destined to perish skill, although he has his immortality to neutralize it. Grid sheathes his sword, downplaying the matter, and asks Piero to hear his request. Since he won, he asks Piero to be his knight. Piero clarifies that he never said he would become his knight, only that he would see for himself if the protagonist was worthy. This response does not convince the protagonist, who accepted the challenge because he wanted Piero to be his knight. A knight must swear loyalty, and loyalty can only be cemented on trust. He tries to explain to the protagonist that if there is no trust, there is no loyalty, and he is a person who made a promise to never swear loyalty to anyone again. He apologizes to Grid but cannot accept his request. Meanwhile, elsewhere in Satisfy, we head into a cave, where Braham exclaims that the magic in this world is the result of his achievements and successes. The authority, innovation, and reputation of magic are all thanks to his greatness, he exclaimed proudly. I cannot understand how Pagma's successor dared to ignore the warning of this great mage. Remember that Mumud was his disciple, and Pagma's successor was able to perfectly recreate his orb, even producing the Crystal Sky Eye, an implement that he secretly placed in Mumud's magic orb and spread throughout the world. Braham constantly watched him. Mumud wished to achieve greatness and become the best, but Mumud's achievements will forever be recognized as Braham's. Braham exclaims that the title of the person with the greatest intellect can only be his, and he will resurrect so that this title is always attributed to him. Now, Pagma's successor will not be able to escape his watch until he manufactures the soul vessel. We return to Grid 3 days after leaving the Kezan Canyon. The protagonist manages to block a monster's strike, dodging the blows. He exclaims that the level 260 orcs are a nuisance. Grid could easily kill them, but since he is fighting them focusing on the basics, it takes longer to kill them. Grid curses his bad luck. As if he had come 2 days earlier, he would have received help from the guards controlling the orcs, but he wasted too much time with Piero. Looking back, Grid surprises the NPC by commenting that his obsession with trust comes from being abandoned by his master. The swordsman responds that it is rude to jump to conclusions about someone else's circumstances, but Grid continues reporting that Piero is a fugitive, as he was falsely accused by a companion. He mentions that the reason the Emperor turned his back on Piero was that he also had doubts about his loyalty. "Weren't you thinking of completely abandoning society because of that betrayal you experienced from your colleague and master?" asked the protagonist. Piero confirms that the protagonist knows too much about his situation, confirming that Grid is an envoy of Ismail. Grid tries to remind the swordsman that it was he who told him a year and a half ago and even asked him to take revenge for him. Then, Piero remembers a boy he met a year and a half ago, unable to believe it was the protagonist. He is surprised that this pathetic boy has changed so much, commenting that it is unfair for him to waste his life because of that traitor, proposing to Piero that he come with him to fulfill his revenge. This surprises Piero, who asks Grid why he is so obsessed with him, since the Eternal Kingdom is neutral and there is no likelihood of war, and theoretically, Grid would not need a warrior like him. Grid sighs, thinking that Piero is very complicated. The NPC reminds him that he cannot swear loyalty to anyone now. Then the protagonist asks him to listen. "I still need to mature to be able to empathize with others' problems, but I am not so shameless as to force the loyalty of someone who has been betrayed," commented Grid. However, he proposes that Piero accompany him as a guest so they can do things together. This way, even Piero could seek and see if there is another person worthy of his trust. This proposition seems to please the hermit swordsman. Returning to the present, Grid curses the orcs, who would die with a single blow if he used his skills, but they keep appearing. He cannot understand why he has to fight in such a complex way and barely use his excellent items. Piero explains that Grid's skills are a disaster because he relies only on his items. He advises him to lower the center of gravity of his sword and balance it, "Then do this and that," shouted Grid, irritated by the instructions. Piero notes that the power of Grid's sword multiplied after hearing his instructions, and tries to make Grid understand that the journey and adventure will be part of his training. "Think of it as a gift from your guest," he exclaimed, eager to see the place Grid told him about. The protagonist begins to regret bringing him, but they will talk about many other things in Patreon. After a long journey, Grid is happy to see that they have finally reached the last hill, but they would have arrived much earlier if they had flown here. Piero is tired of the constant complaints from our protagonist, and Grid does not remember the way well. The proto reveals that this was his first home, where he invested his valuable time for almost a year and obtained many rewards. The boys arrive at Patreon, the fortified city. Grid estimates that there are still 4 days of travel left to reach Raydan. "You can continue to bother me tomorrow, but let's rest here for now," proposed the tired protagonist. Then, we see that something is watching the outsiders from a tree. On the other side, they recognize the protagonist and cannot believe he has returned to this city. They installed several magical orbs around Patreon under the pretense of watching the Gauss Kingdom, but the true intention was to watch the protagonist. They patiently waited for him to return here at least once. The Count immediately orders the knights to be summoned, and his captain accepts the order. "That shameless thief is in our territory again," said Count Osur, determined to capture him. The manual explains that Patreon is the borderline that separates the western part from the northern part of the Eternal Kingdom. It is also a strategic point for the kingdom, as it shares its borders with the Gauss Kingdom. This fortified city is part of the path that Grid must take to reach his territory. Raydan is one of the starting cities for new players in Satisfy. Inside a tavern, one of the players present asks the innkeeper to improve the food of the place, but the NPC responds that this is a border defense city, and if they want better food, they should go to a tourist city. The player replies that if the food cannot be improved, at least they should improve the smell of the inn so that customers can drink alcohol more comfortably, and he cannot understand how they let those stinking beggars from the back in. Here we see the identity of a player named Coke, a level 109 swordsman. This guy mentions that these misfortunes cannot be allowed, and he will resolve them himself. He stands up to approach Piero, calling him a beggar. "I am in my precious rest, but your nauseating smell does not allow me to rest," he exclaimed, proposing to our protagonists that they go somewhere else. Piero, for his part, enjoys the delicious stew and holds a bone. Grid agrees with the NPC and compares the taste to another dish, but Piero does not know the dish because it does not exist in the Saharan Empire. Then, Coke addresses Piero again, recognizing him as an NPC, and orders him not to ignore a level 109 adventurer like him. But Piero gets rid of the annoying player with the leftover bone from the dish. Coke falls backward unable to react and takes over 3,000 damage from the rest of the food. I can't believe I lost a third of my health because of a lizard's tail bone. Grid comments to Piero that these situations are caused by the NPC's appearances. He advises changing clothes, fixing his hairstyle, and improving his smell, as he appears to be older than he really is. Piero asks if Grid's current appearance bothers him, but the protagonist replies that if Piero is comfortable with that appearance, it doesn't matter to him. This will attract the attention of others. Then, Piero mentions that Grid's basic movements are terrible because he is obsessed with appearances. Grid understands that the swordsman is referring to combat against the orcs and explains that he doesn't need insignificant tricks or control, having good items. Piero asks why Grid wears light boots with such a large sword. He explains that when balancing such a large sword, it's necessary to put weight on the feet to increase power, and heavy boots would help with that. Grid has no knowledge of fencing and wears the boots because he can fly with them, then asks Piero, surprised, if he can really increase his power using heavy boots, which the swordsman confirms. Grid feels he has discovered a hidden mechanism and will now be above the others. Piero changes the subject, asking Grid if he is really a duke and if he is hiding his identity. As Grid mentioned, he invested a lot of time in this place. Grid explains that things would become a nuisance if he didn't hide. Then, Coke stands up and reasons that taking so much damage from a bone must have been a game error. He reveals that in just half a year he has become the best player in the city and has also managed to kill the most fearsome monsters in Patreon alone. He compares his unique existence to that of Grid, the psychopathic butcher, and will not allow an NPC to offend him in that way. Grid can't believe the stranger compared himself to him, and Piero decides to deal with the boy with a P. This time, he throws the food and deals 3,000 damage to the player. The boy can't believe the situation and confirms that it wasn't a game error. This NPC must be a specialist. His strength is on a different dimension. Coke questions if this is the world of specialists, asking Piero how he did it, and the NPC explains that he uses ki to empower himself, revealing that with ki he could use a feather as a sword. Coke's friends stand up to teach a lesson to the beggar who humiliated their companion, but the more experienced Coke asks his companions to back off upon realizing they are no match for the NPC. Then, the guards enter the inn ordering everyone to stop, as Ser Dio is entering the place. The attendees recognize Ser Dio as the Lord of the Knights, a very arrogant person, but they don't understand why he is there. The latter quickly recognizes the bad smell in the place and compares the plebeians to pigs, ordering them to respond and asking if anyone has seen Grid around. Coke doubts they are referring to the famous Grid and doubts that a player of such high level is in the beginner's city. Ser Dio receives no answers but sees no one resembling Grid in the place. Then, Grid stands up and prepares to leave after finishing his meal, but the Knight Dio asks the two strangers to reveal their identity before leaving, and if they do not obey, they will be punished. As he approaches Piero, he instantly regrets realizing that the bad smell has intensified. Grid proposes to leave the place, as he doesn't want to waste time with this insect, commenting that he is bothering the knight. Ser Dio grabs the protagonist by the cloak and is not willing to tolerate the stranger's attitude, but upon removing the cloak, he is completely surprised. Grid comments that he wanted to go unnoticed, but we see that Coke also recognized our protagonist. And well, what did you intend to do if you found me? I noticed you didn't mention my title of Duke. Am I your friend for you to speak to me like that? Asked the psychopathic butcher, leaving the room in silence. The players quickly get emotional upon recognizing Grid and wonder what such a famous person would be doing in Patreon. Grid approaches the knight to inspect him closely, and Ser Dio is startled to realize that Grid's presence is much more overwhelming than he thought. Then, the protagonist immediately recognizes the guy. I will never forget the people who were there that day, he said in a cold tone, followed by a slap to the knight, who did not expect that. The latter exclaims that even being a noble, Grid cannot touch a knight without permission, but Grid exclaims that he cannot believe the guy said that. Hitting him, he exclaims that the manners they teach are important, but more important is the promise they make to the users who fight to fulfill the missions entrusted to them. Piero approaches, curious about the protagonist's past. Grid continues to slap the knight to vent and remembers that he dedicated a lot of time to that mission only to be stabbed in the back. Ser Dio steps back and reveals that he was going to take Grid to Count Asura peacefully, but now that he has humiliated him, he will punish him with the death penalty. Grid responds, bringing the blade of his sword close in an instant. Don't get me wrong. The reason your head is still attached to your body is that I haven't made a decision yet, clarified the protagonist, thanking the wonderful person who taught him, Can. "Because it is thanks to your teachings that you are still alive," said the protagonist, trying to calm down, sheathing his sword and deciding to leave, thinking it was clever of him to wish for a peaceful trip. Piero, on his part, thought he would see something interesting, but he didn't want to interfere and decided to continue his journey with Grid. Then, Coke asks the protagonist to stop for a moment. He asks the guy not to shout to avoid more problems. Grid explains to the man that he will have problems in the city if they think he is his friend, but the guy doesn't care, as he wants to apologize under conditions to his idol. He introduces himself as Coke and promises to become strong until he becomes a person like the protagonist, and then he will see Grid, asking him to remember him until then. Grid becomes much kinder upon hearing that he is the player's idol, and Piero can't believe the change in attitude. Then, Coke asks for an autograph on his chest, and Grid confirms that the guy is not a fan of No. After that, Coke is really happy about what happened to him today, besides the fact that Grid wrote something on his chest. Later, Piero comments that his only goal is revenge, but he is curious about the protagonist's circumstances. He directly asks Grid what happened in Patreon. The protagonist recounts that he worked diligently there for a long time until a repugnant incident occurred. Piero becomes even more curious about the incident, and Grid explains that it is something different but essentially similar to what happened with the knight. He was betrayed, and that place was the beginning of his path to becoming Pagma's successor. Now, the protagonist is reaping the rewards of his effort, but at that moment he lost everything. Grid explains that the person who gave him that mission killed him when he completed it, and the knight of the inn was there that day. As Grid explains what happened, we see a portal open in the sky, and a strong lightning bolt falls. Grid is left speechless when that person appeared. "Did you plan to just pass by here quietly after everything you did?" a familiar voice asks, claiming pending matters between them. Grid finishes his story revealing that Patreon is the territory where the person who betrayed and killed him lives, the Lord of Patreon, Count Osur. Osur murmurs that it was useless from the beginning to trust something to the knight Dio, for if you want to do something well, you must do it yourself. Equipping himself with his items, Grid had planned to settle his affairs with Osur in the future, but when the Count decides to settle them now, Grid warns him that he is not the same. "Maybe you have become his successor. But don't speak as if you were Pagma," exclaimed Osur, assuming it was his own fault for trusting that Grid would deliver Pagma's book to him. He proclaims himself as the only great wizard of the Eternal Kingdom and one of the 10 great wizards of the continent, and cannot believe the protagonist's stupidity for even comparing himself to him. Grid reasons that Patreon is located on the border between the Gauss Kingdom and the Eternal Kingdom, which are enemy kingdoms, meaning it is located at the center of the dispute to control the products that the Eternal Kingdom monopolized. Thanks to being a neutral kingdom, the Gauss Kingdom tried to encourage a border dispute, but the reason the Gauss Kingdom could not make its moves quickly was because of the great wizard Osur, an overwhelming existence. His mere presence makes the enemy think carefully about their actions. Grid does not exaggerate when he says that the great power of Count Osur is enough to neutralize all kinds of disputes. Then, Piero is surprised to see that he is in front of one of the 10 best wizards on the continent and wants to experience his power. Osur thinks that Grid's companion is also a rude person who does not know his place and asks if he wants to die. But then he is dominated by the swordsman's killing intent. "I am curious, as I have never fought against one of the great wizards, and since you are one of them, I want to know how powerful your abilities are," declared the swordsman. Count Osur begins to wonder who the hell Grid's companion is, as just his spirit is enough to make the great wizard feel fear. He did not know of the existence of a monster like this in the kingdom and refuses to fight Piero, as the only one he is pending matters with is Grid's kid. He has no reason to fight the swordsman. Then Piero mentions that he did not request a meeting. He only said that he wanted to test his strength by launching himself at what he exclaims that the Count has no choice. The great mage orders his knights to buy him some time, as he cannot let Grid get the better of Reinhard, the place he commands. He feels that, at this moment, there is no need to fight seriously against a man who is stronger than Grid, so he will create a barrier to fight only against the protagonist. He remembers that Grid's bastard not only stole the rare book of Pagma from him, but also took away the potential wife of his son Bland. The Count intends to deal with the protagonist now, before he finishes establishing his position as Duke and gains more power. Piero, for his part, mocks the strength of the Knights of Osur, unable to help but laugh when he compares them to the Red Knights of the Saharan Empire, who are the strongest knights on the continent in the eyes of the hermit swordsman. This is just a waste of human resources. Then, he activates the third form of his unique swordsmanship skill and, with a powerful movement of his blade, gets rid of the Knights of Osur. The Count cannot believe that a sword key can penetrate a shield, The defense of his proud knights was shattered by a single attack. The knights intend to delay the enemy so that the Count can cast his spell. The agile swordsman is able to block the attacks with ease and, with a movement of his sword, disarms the knight, supports his foot in the air itself, and somehow uses it to elevate himself. Piero was walking in the air, leaving the knights incredulous. He reaches for the weapon of the knight he threw into the air and comments that it is an ideal weapon for this type of situation. A better equipment choice capability than his companion Grid, Piero strikes the weapon hard and throws it against the ground, getting rid of the knights of Osur. The Count only needs a minute to create a barrier, but his knights will not be able to last that long. He had heard beforehand that this group called the Overgeared clan was very strange, but he had never heard that they had a monster like this among their members. Osur has no choice but to set the barrier aside and deal with this beggar first. He then asks Piero about his relationship with Grid and why he is protecting him. Piero replies that he is not protecting anyone and also has no relationship with the Duke. Grid is just curious about the great mage's abilities, but he states that Osur is not an opponent for Grid, so he proposes that it would be better to face him. Jumping at the Count, he explains that at this moment his strength is not complete and he will be a good rival. Osur charges his quick attack, as he needs more speed when fighting a swordsman. Piero strikes Osur with his sword, but he does not understand how he dodged him. Then he is trapped in Orion's illusions and asks the Count if he wants to play hide and seek, cuts the illusions, and reveals that he is not one to enjoy this boring way of fighting, but he cannot help it since he is fighting against a mage. Then Osur replies that it is the same for him. He must finish casting his spell before Piero's sword reaches him. Thanks to knowing the dangers of close combat with a swordsman, his staff is specialized in reducing his casting time and amplifying his magical power. He then uses the soul weakness ability on Piero. The swordsman feels that a restraining magic has been used and exclaims that it is disgusting that they try to limit his movements, but in all this, he managed to locate the true Count Osur. The mage retreats, not believing that Piero could resist his magic and still locate his true body, but he uses his ice tornado and manages to impact his spell on the swordsman. If he wants to face an opponent as skilled as Piero, he needs to create time to prepare, so he had to use 2 level A spells, assuming that Piero will take at least 5 seconds to recover enough to kill him with his lethal level S spell. Grid watches and is surprised by Piero's strength. His resistance and agility are superior to those of the protagonist, and he is in a state where he cannot use all his strength, so the future value of the swordsman is unimaginable. Then we see that the spell that traps Piero begins to break. Grid thinks that the day Piero becomes a sword saint will be the day he is reborn as the strongest NPC and probably capable of defeating a dragon or something like that. Destroying Osur's restraining spell, the swordsman manages to impose himself over the great mage. Osur did not expect the monster to recover so quickly, so he could not accumulate more damage before preparing his level S spell. But then Piero manages to use his powerful sword strike that lights up the dark battlefield. Although, after the impact, he cannot believe the result. The Count managed to absorb all the power of Piero's attack with just one barrier. What absurd magical power he has, exclaimed the surprised swordsman, but deduces that he will not be able to maintain the barrier for long and prepares another attack, then impacts several attacks and manages to break Osur's barrier. The Count manages to resist with difficulty and feels that he is facing a true monster. Piero, for his part, is surprised. The Count is able to move quickly while maintaining control of his shield with minimal effort and casts another spell at the same time. He truly is a great mage, and his level of concentration exceeds that of a human, so he decides to press him more to speed things up, grips his sword, and begins to cast a skill, using the 5th form of his unique swordsmanship skill. He invokes a large key sword with which he intends to end the fight directly, but Osur, for his part, has also finished casting his spell. Piero's ability breaks upon impacting against Count Osur. The swordsman cannot believe that his sword key had no effect and questions whether Osur has become immune to damage. The Count uses his astral projection ability and passes through Piero's body at great speed. The astral projection is a skill with which the soul and body of the caster separate for 3 seconds. The caster can control the soul that has emerged from his body, which will be immune to all damage while the soul is outside of it. The soul inflicts 10-30 points of damage plus half of the caster's current magical power to all targets in its path. By passing through Piero, it causes great damage and, at that moment, warns Grid that he has told him many times before, "My true opponent is you," he said again to the protagonist, passing through him with his astral projection. Grid curses the bastard while receiving over 40,000 points of damage from the attack and, as he received a critical hit, he will be unable to regain his senses. Osur passes through the wounded protagonist, and Grid has been seriously injured for real. He thinks that soon the 3 seconds of his astral projection will pass. The Count lowered his guard but is impressed with the astral projection he had heard about. He then decides to attack the empty body of Count Osur. The great mage feels danger and decides to quickly return to his body. This causes a great explosion in the area, and Piero deduces that this magical shockwave must have been caused because his soul returned from the astral projection. Osur shouts that his goal has not changed and aims again at our protagonist. The protagonist praises Grid for having resisted his astral projection, but he will not withstand his next attack. Then the Count is hit by an unexpected attack, feeling that it was so powerful that it was able to destroy his defense focused on physical attacks. He cannot believe that the protagonist can cause so much damage and questions whether what the protagonist is holding is really a sword. "Are you surprised that I didn't die from your attack?" The protagonist questions, explaining that he is more surprised that he spat blood from Osur's attack. The protagonist repeats the Count's phrase, "If you want something done right, you must do it yourself," somewhat surprised because the Count thinks the same way he does. He then uses his transcending ability and covers the attacks that destroy his barrier. He cannot believe that the protagonist is more powerful than the beggar. He does not know how the hell Grid became so strong in less than 2 years. The rumors about his performance in Reinhard were true. Grid continues to attack with links, increasingly surprising the incredulous Count Osur. The latter screams and accepts that the protagonist has become so strong that it is impossible to comprehend the greatness of his power. The protagonist uses the blacksmith's fury and begins to dominate the great mage, but Osur knows that the strength of a legend develops and strengthens over many years. Empires are not built in a single day. After that, he casts his hellish harpoon spell, shouting that this was the strength he acquired after defending the Eternal Kingdom for decades. "It is not something that a guy who got everything by luck could have," he exclaimed, referring to the protagonist. But the Count's flames are extinguished by our protagonist's sword. "Why do you speak of time?" Grid asked, explaining that the only thing that matters in the end is achieving the goal, and the Count has no authority to say that, as he toyed with someone else's time. The Count cannot believe that the protagonist said this, but is hit by a blow of failure before he can respond. The blow is powerful and sends the mage flying, causing him to drop his staff from the impact. He ends up against a tree and screams from the pain he received. Then, Grid plants his sword beside the great mage and orders Osur to beg for his life if he wants the great Duke Grid to spare him. Osur still remembers when the protagonist was just a boy. The protagonist used to have a weak body and lacked talent for everything. Grid did not reflect on himself. He was just jealous of others and coveted their possessions. He had an aggressive look towards the weak but was cowardly in front of the strong. It was supposed to always be this way, but now the protagonist's eyes are full of dignity. His gaze is similar to that of an absolute being. Osur wonders how the protagonist changed so much, then starts to laugh and exclaims that Grid's audacity remains the same, and remembers that it was Grid who broke the contract, so he will not beg. He reveals that he didn't even know if the rare book of Pagma existed, which is why he offered the protagonist a great reward suitable for the time that would be invested, and Grid accepted the deal. But after finding the rare book of Pagma, the protagonist's eyes filled with ambition to have it, and not only that, but he also took the woman who loved the Count's son, mentioning that his resentment against Grid is greater than what the protagonist has against him. Grid responds that this does not change the fact that he was tricked into carrying out a reckless mission, lost his life countless times, and wasted a lot of time because of this mission, only to be killed so carelessly. Osur remembers that they had a contract and he only did what he was supposed to do. In this situation, it could be considered karma, mentioning that his pride as the protector of this kingdom for decades crumbled thanks to the protagonist, someone who was not even a threat to Osur in the past, since he assigned this mission to the protagonist because he noticed that he was very perseverant, and seeing him now with a hero's worthy appearance, Osur can understand that Grid went through very difficult times. "You are stronger than I am. I am sure my words must sound like lamentations," said the Count, asking the protagonist to kill him once and for all. Grid reasons that finding the rare book of Pagma and the rest of the things he did after changing his class were thanks to his own efforts, but it is thanks to the opportunity that Osur gave him that he could become Pagma's successor during this time, and that the protagonist could not compare himself to anyone, even if he did his best, blaming Count Osur for the things that did not go well. He reflects that it was thanks to that damned habit of blaming others for his misfortunes that his decision became difficult, then proposes to leave the situation as it is. The Count asks if they will really spare his life, even when he tried to kill the protagonist. And Grid replies that he does not know if he will change his mind later, but for now, he will not kill him. Osur murmurs that it is not easy to ignore the fact that a count attacked a duke, then asks if Grid wants something from him as compensation. The protagonist was trying to be generous, but it seems that Asur is doubting him after sparing the Count's life. The Count comments that Grid is not the type to do something without expecting anything in return, and Grid remembers that it is true, so he will not let this opportunity slip away. He asks his swordsman companion to keep an eye on the Count for a moment and, if he moves a millimeter, to hit him hard on the head, while Piero watches the Count in the background. The protagonist calls his advisor Lowell. The strategist reveals that all the guild members have already arrived in Raydan, except Euphemina, then asks when Grid will arrive. The protagonist replies that he is in Patreon and will arrive soon, but now he has something to consult with him, and asks what would be the best thing they can obtain from Count Asur. Lowell recognizes him as one of the 10 great mages of the continent and Lord of Patreon, and deduces that the protagonist faced him for some reason. If they're talking about this NPC, Lowell can recommend something. If there is a possibility of obtaining a great treasure from him, it would be just one thing, and then reveals it to the protagonist. Grid thanks the swordsman for watching the Count. Grid turns to the mage and asks the protagonist to get straight to the point. "I want you to hand over your son," the protagonist said directly. This was unexpected for Asur, who curses Grid's bastard, exclaiming that he can give anything else, but not his son Brand. But Grid has already discovered the reason why the Count's personality is so complicated. He lost his wife due to an illness and his first son, who was a warrior. Brand is the only one left of his family, and Asur had trouble raising him because he spoiled him too much, so he orders him again to hand over Brand. The Count screams that the protagonist is crossing the line and would rather die than do that. Even if his body and soul burn in hell, he will never hand over his son. Grid exclaims that it would be a tragedy for Brand if the Count died here, and Grid does not want to use force. A voice asks Duke Grid that it is enough. It is Asur's son, who mentions that there is no need to continue, tired, as he came running to the location. He asks the protagonist to leave his father alone. Asur orders Brand to get out of here quickly, as he is acting recklessly. Grid understands that Brand can grasp the situation faster than his father and praises Brand's excellent decision, standing up. Asur orders the protagonist to shut up, threatening to deliver his soul to God and kill Grid instantly if the protagonist touches a single hair on his son. However, something stops the Count at that moment. Brand tells his father that it is enough and asks him to think of it as a study under the supervision of Duke Grid, asking him to calm down. He bids farewell to his father, pleading for him to take care of himself until they meet again, as he wants to see him healthy and smiling. Grid sighs, realizing that the situation is becoming more complicated than it should be. He advises Asur to listen to his son, confessing that he is a different person from the past and desperately needs other people. He does not have the luxury of unloading his anger on someone else. Grid assures that he will not take revenge on Asur's son and asks him to hand him over when he returns home, as he will have grown and will be able not only to measure up but to surpass him. The story continues with someone observing the top places in the overall ranking and being surprised because Chris finally achieved his third-class advancement. It can be seen that the top is led by Krogel, with a White Swordsman class, followed by Cybele, with a Debirian Envoy class, and Chris, the Destroyer Warrior. A guy observes and reasons that the Destroyer Warrior class, focused on dealing damage, matches Chris's personality, and if he had obtained his class advancement earlier, he probably would not have been defeated in the Golem invasion. This player thinks he has spent too much time in a dungeon and will now organize his inventory to find a merchant. He reveals that he had to travel to the Eastern Continent to achieve his third-class advancement, but although he has obtained many titles and increased the level of his dual-wielding skill, he feels it is too early to face the unknown dangers of the Eastern Continent. He exclaims that he should level up in the Western Continent, where it is easier, before attempting another adventure in the Eastern Continent. The player thinks of heading east and west of the Saharan Empire, to the Oria's Labyrinth and the western region of the Eternal Kingdom, which has been much talked about lately. Here, the identity of Krogel, the White Swordsman who leads the first place in the unified ranking, is presented. Meanwhile, elsewhere in Satisfy, Grid asks Piero his opinion on the strength of one of the 10 great mages of the continent, to which the swordsman responds, revealing that he exceeded his expectations. He reasons that Asur could have gone against the two if he had had an orb. Grid deduces that Asur preferred to have the amplification of magical power rather than the advantages of magic stored in orbs, which means that Asur must have been very confident in his casting speed, to which the Count was more powerful than Grid could imagine. Even though the Sacred Light Armor reduces magical damage by 50%, the mage was able to deal 40,000 points of damage with one attack. Grid thinks that Piero managed to withstand the attack without even using equipment, confirming that he is a monster, and takes the opportunity to ask him a question. How strong is this Asmol that you can't defeat him on your own, Grid? Remember that Piero even has the skill destined to perish and could kill the guy relatively easily. Then, Piero explains that the point is not how strong Asmol is, but how difficult it is to reach him. He reveals that if he even sets foot in the Empire's territory, he will die instantly, as the strength of the Saharan Empire is far greater than what Grid can imagine. But he brings Grid back to the present, warning him of an approaching threat. The protagonist is expectant in the desert when a gigantic level 330 worm appears before him, leaving the protagonist incredulous. Grid is frightened by the unpleasant appearance of the creature, and Piero mocks the protagonist's fear of insects. Grid strikes the gigantic insect, but is counterattacked by the worm, sending him flying and causing him 6,000 points of damage. Grid is puzzled as to why he took so much damage from a common monster, especially since the monster withstood a blow from his sword, a failure with an enhancement of more than 9. Grid deduces that the sand is restricting his mobility, and that is why the damage from his sword was reduced, so he uses his flying skill. He is quickly reached by another worm that emerged from the ground. Grid falls on his back and complains about why there are so many insects. Piero advises Grid that to put strength into the sword, he must use his whole body, noting that the movements and technique with the protagonist's sword are clumsy. Moreover, while flying, he cannot properly apply his weight to the strikes. Grid exclaims that this is just a game and not a kendo dojo. After that, he uses Pagma's fencing to strike down the giant worms, dealing them great damage, stating that the worms are strong, but he can easily defeat them with his skills, not to mention that, being level 330, they provide a lot of experience. The protagonist will take this opportunity to increase his level, which is stagnated at 270. Deciding to allocate the 400 available stat points to agility to be like Piero, the swordsman explains to Grid that if he concentrates his strength in his thighs and hips, the superior speed of his body will also increase, enhancing the speed of his sword. In turn, Grid exclaims that Pagman's successor doesn't need advice, and at the same time finishes off the worms using Pagma's fencing. Grid laughs loudly because today he will level up many times, and Piero reasons that the protagonist made a smart decision by taking Osir's son hostage instead of executing the count. In Piero's eyes, the protagonist is not an idiot, but his skills have stagnated, and his pride prevents him from following Piero's advice. The latter reasons that if Grid learned to properly use his body, he would be much stronger, which is a waste. For Piero was thinking of turning him into his combat partner. Then, Brand catches the swordsman's attention by finishing off a worm. Piero notices that Osir's son's skills have improved since they embarked on the journey together, which is why he believes Brand must be putting into practice the advice he was giving to Grid. The young man inherited his father's magic and learned very good fencing, being quite a lion cub. Piero thinks it will be fun to teach him a few things before they reach Raydan, so he can show Grid how important technique and control are. In turn, Grid proposes to level up to 275 before reaching Raydan. A few hours later, we see that Grid continues to kill monsters, exclaiming that it is very easy and that technique doesn't matter when you have good items. Grid thinks that not even Braham's golem army could easily cross this desert, and he begins to understand the reason why they gave him the territory of Raydan. Faced with an army of monsters, Grid deduces that they could not handle the monsters from the western region of the kingdom, and the creatures made the desert their home. A frog interrupts his thoughts, spitting acid at the protagonist, but we see that Grid resists the control effects due to his passive and uses the skill Transcend Link. However, a window informs him that it is not available due to the cooldown time. Then, Grid asks Piero for help because there are too many enemies, although it is Brand who rushes to Grid's rescue, which surprises the protagonist. Brand asks Grid if he is okay, and the protagonist wonders when the boy became so strong. A few days ago, he had difficulty fighting level 280 monsters, but now he can face monsters with 50 levels more. Grid can see that the young man has only leveled up 5 times and his stats are not that superior. He wonders how he became so strong. Then an idea crosses his mind and he looks for Piero. The latter congratulates Osir's son for having understood him. A sword is not a toy, so he lets him defend and counterattack instead of dodging the blows. Grid discovers that Bran has developed quickly thanks to Piero's teaching. The swordsman notes that Bran's talent for magic is superior to his fencing, so he suggests that he focus only on magic if the opponent is stronger. Bran takes this order literally. Grid also asks Piero for some advice, although Piero reminds him that Grid said he didn't need it. He assumes that Grid changed his mind after seeing Brand and questions the pride of Pagma's successor. Grid denies having such a thing, as he only cares about being stronger. Piero decides to teach the protagonist and thinks it has been a while since he saw a youth like this. In the following days, Piero has been instructing the protagonist in the art of fencing. Time passed quickly, and after hard training, the protagonist is happy to be able to kill the monsters in this area without using any skills, even leveling up to 275 in 2 days. Piero mentions that Grid has finally learned the basic techniques with the sword, but still has much to learn. Grid asks Piero to teach him many more things, although Piero rejects the request, apologizing that Grid will not be able to further improve his skills. Brand reasons that the protagonist's skills already exceed the basic level, as the basic level, according to Piero, is impressive. Piero calculates that if they cross one last mountain, they will reach Raydan tomorrow, and Grid is surprised by the speed of the journey. Finally, they will arrive at the second largest city, after the capital Rionar, the territory of Grid. Then, we go back to the past, transporting ourselves to Raydan, just 1 day before Grid meets Count Osur. We see that in the castle of Raydan, someone is surprised to learn that the new lord's subordinates arrived so quickly and reprimands his soldiers for not having been informed earlier. The soldier apologizes, saying they took time to recognize them because they were busy with a dispute, but the subject mocks the guards for fearing citizens who throw stones. He introduces himself as Arik, the administrator of Raydan, and a baronet, a rank lower than baron. The latter proposes to silence the people by force, as he is worried that the new lord of Raydan will get angry with him if he takes too long to greet his subordinates, while the administrator of Raydan orders to put an end to the riots. We see that a person appears behind him. It is Fakir, who proposes to clean up the dirt occupying important positions. The soldier turns around, but we see that Administrator Arik has disappeared into thin air. Elsewhere in Raydan, they discuss that the situation turned out to be complicated before the arrival of the clan members. They were happy about the powerful monsters in the area, but Lowell did not imagine that the situation was so critical. He mentions that the 5 million gold from the clan's funds will disappear in an instant if they leave things as they are, and reveals that there is information about manipulation and transportation costs and other things by the merchants. For this reason, the administrator enjoyed luxuries, taking advantage of the situation while there was no lord, but proposes to extract information before executing him. Uroi comments that the clan members have already taken care of the monsters near the river and have set to work on other activities, to which Lowell proposes to go help them. Fakir asks if it will be okay to make decisions without Grid, as the protagonist would throw a tantrum if he knew they spent the clan's funds. Lowell explains that there is nothing they can do, as Grid would be more disappointed if he saw the current situation. The great city of Raydan can house up to 500,000 families, but now it is on the brink of desolation, with only 20,000 NPCs. If they do not use the money to support these people, there will be no NPCs left for the different jobs. 4 days later, we see that the gates of Raydan open wide, and our protagonist enters the city exclaiming that the new lord has arrived and asks for a warm welcome from his subjects. But we see that the inhabitants are too busy working to pay attention to the protagonist. Grid is surprised by the many workers, as he expected from a large city, but does not understand why they are wearing only rags. He becomes even paler upon seeing his clanmates, Regis and Lowell, working the land. At this point, the statistics of the great city of Raydan are shown. It has 20,551 NPCs and no players, and the military strength consists of 3 knights, Uroi, Lowell, and Jude, plus 141 soldiers. It has no special products, and the security state is terrible. Grid is shocked to learn that King Bice Baden deceived them, but Lowell asks his lord to calm down, as this is proof that the king trusts Grid. To begin with, he will give him a report on what he found when interrogating the administrator of Raydan. He reveals that the desertification of the place began 10 years ago, after hundreds of monsters appeared in the desert. As the strength of the monsters was overwhelming, it was impossible to subjugate them, and the kingdom stopped sending help. The ruler abandoned his post, and the kingdom focused on finding a talented person capable of rebuilding the city, but the only person they found was Count Osur, who could not leave Patreon. Eventually, the citizens had to find a way to survive. Lowell reports that the people had to ask for help from the Saharan Empire. The empire accepted their petition with the intention of seizing part of the kingdom's territory, but the powerful monsters from the western region were a great burden for the Saharan Empire, and they began to demand payment for the protection of the Aveng River, their last hope. The payment increased significantly each year, and the people of Raydan soon could not afford it. As a result, the empire also abandoned them. Grid exclaims that it is pathetic and asks what kind of people would stay in this place. The inhabitants are starving and could have gone elsewhere, but Lowell explains that they cannot do that because of the creatures that threatened this city before the desertification. He reveals that there are vampires, and each year a large number of people end up becoming their food. A shiver runs through Grid's body as he remembers his experience with Marie Rose. Lowell explains that the ancient lord could no longer tolerate the damage caused by the vampires and organized a squad to hunt them down, which was 10 years ago. The strategist looks out the window, and then Grid notices something and believes he understands why the people have not abandoned Raydan. He cannot believe that these people have been waiting for 10 years for this squad, obviously annihilated, to return home. The inhabitants are his family. Grid cannot imagine what it is like to wait for 10 years. The strategist thinks this is the worst territory. They cannot even wait for the appearance of new players because of the powerful monsters nearby. By reconnecting the water channels to the farmland, Lowell estimates that they will be able to solve the food problem in about 2 months. But to save the citizens during that time, they will have to spend 3 silver coins per person, which will result in thousands of gold coins. Grid is not free from the claws of greed, so Lowell does not know if the protagonist will be able to take on this complicated challenge. The protagonist sighs at his bad luck and exclaims that now that he has become a duke, he will be out of money. He decides to prioritize the people and asks what they should do first to save them. Lowell thinks that Grid's personality is not the best, but it is sufficient and responds by asking the protagonist to do something. Then we are transported to the great blacksmith shop of Raydan. Grid cannot believe that the boy asked him to make agricultural tools. Lowell tries to calm the protagonist, explaining that, in the current situation, agricultural tools are very important. Grid devises a plan and decides to lend the tools he makes, but will later charge rent for them, a comment that disappoints Lowell, who believed that Grid had changed. Then Lowell asks the protagonist to introduce him to the 2 subjects that Grid brought. Grid remembers them and deduces that they will get bored in Raydan. Piero planned to take a walk and train Brand later. Grid exclaims that this will not be enough to kill the boredom and proposes to the boys to help in the fields. This proposal surprises the son of Count Azza. Grid explains that the land has become barren and the boys will enjoy the joy of seeing the results of this kind of work. Brand cannot believe that Grid is asking this of one of the greatest elites of the Eternal Kingdom, although he cannot complain due to his current situation. He believes that Piero should not be treated this way. The swordsman, in turn, thinks it will be fun to work as a farmer for the first time, as he is no longer a noble and sees nothing wrong with learning a little more about the lives of commoners. Brand cannot believe the swordsman's decision, and Piero thinks it will be a good opportunity to train muscles that are normally not used, revealing that he has enjoyed training the boys for the last 9 days but has started to think about what he will do after completing his revenge. He realized that he could do something fun by taking a walk around the city and its surroundings. Grid only proposed the idea because he thought it would be fun and is happy that Piero is regaining the desire to enjoy life. He can see that his thoughts, actions, and words can change a person, so he decides something. Grid mentions to Lowell that the boys will help him with agriculture, but the strategist still does not know who they are and asks Grid to introduce them. But Grid orders him as the clan leader to find out for himself. Later, we are transported to the labor fields of Raydan, where the NPCs accompany Lowell. The strategist cannot believe how insensitive the protagonist is and deduces that the blonde is Brand, a noble son of Asur, but wonders who the hell the beggar is. He thought Grid would bring someone with immense talent, but it took 9 days to bring this beggar. Lowell introduces himself to the boys as Grid's advisor and someone competent in the use of ki. The son of Asur introduces himself as Brand of Yen and comments that he knows how to use the sword and magic but has much to improve. The latter can feel that Lowell is a very skilled person. Piero also introduces himself and comments that he is competent in fencing but still has a long way to go. Lowell understands that they are a common magical swordsman and a vagabond, so there will be no problems letting them help, handing them tools. Piero begins to inspect the agricultural equipment and mentions that it will be a good experience. It is also Brand's first time. He decides to work hard to make it a good experience. Lowell takes charge of removing the stones from the field to be able to sow the seeds. Lowell tells the boys to ask if they do not understand something and to rest if they are tired. In the meantime, he will be working in another area, reasoning that even with 20,000 NPCs working in the fields, the efficiency is terrible. He remembers that there are only 3,000 tools and the rest of the inhabitants are working with bare hands. Lowell thinks that instead of giving hoes to 2 novices, it would be better to assign a plot for them to give up. Then, he uses his Earth Dragon Claw skill to instantly destroy the stones in the field, surprising Brand, who believes he can also use magic to prepare the land. However, Piero comments that he would be wasting the opportunity to train his body, mentioning that there are things he can learn from the surroundings, and asks the boy to feel how he feels with each strike, each drop of sweat. All of this will provide ingredients to improve fencing. Brand reveals that he had not seen it this way and feels that working in the field is a great burden for the body, something that nobles like you and I scorned in the past. The intense sweat of work, exclaimed Piero. After a while, we see that Lowell is exhausted from constantly using a skill that clears about 1,650 square meters per hour. Piero calls Lowell, asking the strategist to return the artifact and rest, but then Piero reveals that he has finished his part and asks if there is more to do. The strategist cannot believe that they have finished 16,500 square meters in just 1 hour. Brand prepares the land with great momentum, and Lowell can feel that his speed is comparable to that of the guild members. Lowell asks Piero to continue plowing the front land, which the swordsman agrees to do to continue training. Regis asks about the identity of the boys, as they are truly fast. Lowell also plans to observe a little to see their skills. We see that Piero begins to concentrate and, out of nowhere, opens his eyes with agile and quick movements, instantly clearing a large area of the field, destroying stones and leveling the ground with great ease. He stops and asks if it is okay this way. These skills leave the guild members completely astonished. Piero looks at the ground and notices something. Regis continues to be impressed by the ridiculous speed of the Lord and deduces that he must be an experienced farmer. It is the first time Lowell has seen something like this. Piero asks if the land will be lacking water until they can reconnect the channels, and Lowell confirms, commenting that they will work on the channels soon. Piero strikes the ground with great force. "Let me make things a little easier," proposes the swordsman, releasing an overwhelming aura, exerting great force on the ground and making the entire terrain vibrate with the handle of the hoe. The boys do not know why there is such a sudden earthquake. The first time Lowell arrived in Raydan, he felt impatience, but he made a decision based on his confidence, even though his heart was flooded upon seeing that they had to start from scratch. We see that water begins to spring from the ground. Piero's strike caused a large geyser of water to shoot to the surface, flooding the dry fields of Raydan. Lowell tried to hide his feelings to maintain his role as an unshakable advisor, but he did not stop to think about all these worn-out and depressed people. Lowell had forgotten that they also have feelings that are reflected on their faces. He thinks that the most complicated thing for an advisor is to admit that there are unknown variables, as he is tasked with calculating all possible situations. Lowell had to endure with the hope that no serious incidents would occur, but exclaims that Grid is a strange person. We see that the protagonist meets someone while working in the blacksmith shop. Piero, in turn, comments that this is good land, mentioning that it is interesting to realize that there are more things to see and experience. "What do you think about this? Does it not deserve a celebration?" proposes Piero, after performing a feat that lifted the hearts of the people. Lowell exclaims that this is so incredible that he cannot think of anything better than a party, unable to believe that the protagonist brought an experienced farmer at the moment they needed it most. Lowell confirms that Grid is a true enigma, and we see that the protagonist reunites with Elder Can in the blacksmith shop. Sometime later, in the blacksmith shop of Raydan, Grid observes a robust normal-grade hoe made by Kansas. The protagonist comments that it will be a great reference, and his understanding of the hoe increases by 100%, learning its production method. Both blacksmiths work hard in manufacturing while talking about their adventures. Grid mentions that it is nice to be back working with Ken after a long time, and the elder replies that now Grid is the ruler of a great city and someone in whom the king himself trusts. However, he also missed working alongside the protagonist. Ken thinks they are just simple agricultural tools, so he proposes to hurry so they can talk calmly. Grid, in turn, is surprised that the elder blacksmith has already finished 3 rakes in less than an hour. Ken responds that they must be quick to meet the large quantity required by Lowell and is surprised that Grid hasn't finished even one. Then Grid calls the elder and says he didn't bring him here to do such a sad job as that of those old blacksmiths. He reveals that he needs him to forge the best agricultural tools that have ever been created, tools that can help an average farmer become a great farmer. He reminds Khan that he is a high-class blacksmith and his pride shouldn't allow him to make simple tools just to meet a quota. Ken is amazed by Grid's incredible dignity. There is no doubt that he is the successor of Pagman, the legendary blacksmith. The elder blacksmith agrees with the protagonist and begins to forge. The protagonist can understand that they are going through tough times. Grid was worried that Ken might have problems here due to the heat, but is happy to see that the elder is healthy. Can, for his part, jokes that this is nothing compared to the blazing flames that blacksmiths face. Grid asks Elder Can to take care of his health and reveals that this place they are working in will be the starting point for greater things. Grid mentions that this will be his home to which he will return after his adventures. Elder Can is moved and thinks that now he also has a new home to return to, and asks Grid to take care of himself as well. Grid agrees and changes the subject, noting that they have incredible furnaces that they should make the most of. The blacksmith shop seems small from the outside, but inside there are 8 large furnaces, and it looks like a factory where at least a few dozen people could work. Grid begins to realize how large this city used to be and wants to devise a plan to bring other blacksmith users here. Moments later, we see an ideal hoe of epic classification that slightly improves soil quality. Lowell congratulates the protagonist for having forged such a fantastic hoe, worthy of a legendary blacksmith, but holding a normal hoe, Grid asks if they are mocking him with this comment. Lowell can understand that the hoe was forged by Elder Khan, so Lowell has to inform Grid about something in the castle and requests that the protagonist accept it. She reports that the highest point of the castle is on the 11th floor. This castle is as large as a royal castle, and the height at which the highest point is located represents the power of the lord of the city. This means that the power of the former lord of Raydan was comparable to that of a king. Lowell mentions that the castle has 127 rooms and 6 other auxiliary buildings, a barracks that can hold up to 8,000 soldiers, and 3 military training facilities. This surprises Grid, who thought the castle would be as miserable as the rest of the city. The strategist comments that the people sold all the movable items and belongings in the castle to pay the tribute demanded by the Saharan Empire, but they made sure to keep the Lord's throne. An emblem of Raydan is the last thing they have left and can be proud of. The people sacrificed to maintain this place, even when their leaders abandoned them. Grid cannot understand why they would do all this for a throne they cannot sit on. Then Grid asks Lowell and Roy if they still believe he can become the best. Roy instantly responds that yes, exclaiming that the height of the Raydan castle will be the tallest in the entire kingdom. Lowell also believes this and reveals that Grid is the only man he has recognized in his life, understanding that this seat has a lot of significance. Grid wonders if he will be worthy of sitting on it. He remembers that his disgusting life only changed because he became the successor of Pagma, but whether or not he is Pagma's successor, he has always strived to make everything work out, so he determines that he is worthy. Grid has doubts about whether he can be a good lord who can live up to all these people. He thinks that the people are the source of income for the city and becoming their lord does not fit him, but if they are loyal to him, he must reciprocate, so he orders his strategist, Lowell, not to take advantage of the will of these people. Lowell complies with the order, surprised by Grid's words. Grid cannot promise anything, but he has them, who believe that he can become the best. Grid will accept this personal challenge. He will be the Lord of Raydan. The boys are proud of the Lord they follow, and all that remains is to walk a path that will lead them to the greatest achievements. Lowell proceeds to communicate the objectives and explains that the main goal is to quickly recover the population and industry of Raydan to restore it to the level of a great city. He proposes to start with agriculture to stimulate manufactured products and their consumption, to complement them with external resources. Then he reveals that the expert farmer Piero solved another problem by finding an underground water source, and Grid does not remember Piero having the class of legendary farmer. Lowell continues explaining that they need a massive promotion of blacksmithing activities with the aim of transforming Raydan into a trading city. Regarding the Overgeared Guild, they must deal with the giant worms that must have some underground base, and once they annihilate them, they must also resolve that problem. Lowell believes that with this they will be able to level up quickly. She continues with her plan, apologizing to Grid for asking this, and the protagonist stands up, understanding that he must forge items for the guild while continuing to create agricultural tools, exclaiming that devising laborious plans is Lowell's job and the protagonist just needs to fulfill them. Lowell asks to leave everything in her hands, and the ambitious strategist begins to develop her plans to rebuild the city. In a hostile environment, minimizing the consumption of limited resources is the most important. We see that Tobias informs that they have finished exploring the surroundings of the castle. Tobias will check the outskirts of Raydan to see if he can find any village to increase the population of the great city, but Lowell rejects this idea. As if there is a village near Raydan, it must be a den of vampires. She reminds that the minimum level of vampires is 250, and there are some that exceed level 400. They need to avoid any possible danger until the city is stable. The primary mission of the Overgeared Guild is to secure wood for reconstruction. It seems like a simple job, but it is something only they can do because of the desert monsters. To revive a dying city, it is important to revitalize the basic industries, so Piero and Brand took charge of agriculture. Jude, who boasts of being the strongest, took care of the physical training of the soldiers. Once the soldiers improve their physical capacity, they will be able to reduce their capabilities with Grid's weapons. This system of strategist Lowell needs to be sustainable, so they will need manufacturing. Lowell is willing to rebuild the ecosystem, but there is still one last missing piece for her puzzle. Transporting us to the entrance of Ray Dan, the soldiers can see someone approaching the city. The stranger expresses that he has pending matters in the castle, but the soldiers cannot allow the entry of outsiders without permission. The subject exclaims that Ray Dan really has a great castle, as the rumor said, but the soldiers' clothing is not in harmony with the castle. "I guess that's why they brought me here," exclaimed the person who was called by the new lord. Grid is surprised because only 10 days have passed, and they are already informing him of so many things, and he understands that governing a city is not easy. Lowell comments that, thanks to the tools the protagonist forged along with Can, productivity has increased exponentially, so Grid calculates that the city will be in good condition in a month, but Lowell refutes Grid, revealing that at this rate they will never be able to reach the development of other cities, something that Grid does not understand. Lowell explains that it is because they do not have the most important element for prosperity: money. Grid asks about the money they obtained along with the territory, and Lowell reveals that there is almost nothing left after they used it to help the people. She informs that they are spending 2,000 gold per day to feed the people, not counting transportation costs, so they urgently need more money. Grid cannot believe the hint they are dropping. "No, not a chance," exclaims the protagonist. Lowell explains that the crops they are planting will soon grow and will be able to feed the people, but they need money to continue making the city grow. "Our only option is your wealth, your resources," exclaimed the strategist, trying to convince Grid in his decision to be a good lord. Although Grid has completely forgotten that he is the lord of the city. Then Can enters the blacksmith shop, noticing that there is a lot of tension in the air. He needs to ask for some supplies, but feels that it is not the right moment. At the same time, one can see the silhouette of someone behind him. "What a joy to see a familiar face," exclaimed the subject greeting Kansas. Then the elder is surprised to see this subject in the blacksmith shop. Grid continues discussing with strategist Lowell. The protagonist proposes to do a crowdfunding with all the guild members, but Lowell explains that the other members cannot earn money because they are busy with city matters. Then Can interrupts the boys to introduce the guest. "The atmosphere around you is as tense as always," murmured the subject, understanding that he will have much more work than he expected. Lowell does not know who the subject is, and Grid comments that he is late because he waited for him for a long time. One can see that Euphemina did a good job, and this will be the missing piece for Lowell. Grid welcomes Rabbit, who greets His Excellency Grid with a bow, after not having seen him for so long. Rabbit bows as a commoner to greet His Excellency and great hero, Duke Grid. Lowell asks for the identity of the subject that Grid considers the solution to the problems. The protagonist introduces him as someone who used to be second in command in the Marrow Company and responsible for making that company the largest in the north. He mentions that Rabbit has great and surprising business skills but was imprisoned due to the corruption of the Marrow Company. Although Grid asked a favor from his father-in-law and deduces that Rabbit should have come along with Euphemina, the impression Grid had of Rabbit in the past has changed. But he has not forgotten that he has what it takes to make a company grow and mentions that Rabbit looks very well for someone who has been imprisoned for a while. Rabbit, for his part, feels that the protagonist has changed remarkably, from his gestures to his physical appearance, confirms that he came here along with Euphemina, and praises Grid's aura, the aura of someone who is about to reach the top as an absolute ruler. Grid asks Rabbit to stop flattering him and apologizes for asking this when he just arrived, but asks Rabbit if he remembers the promise to enrich him, expressing that the time has come and proposes that he be his subject. Rabbit kneels and exclaims that he will obey Grid and follow him with pleasure. The merchant comments that now he can only aspire to be the second richest person in the world, after Grid. The protagonist does not like the idea of paying someone monthly and assumes that he will also have to give Rabbit a title, so he asks Lowell if he should do it. Lowell reminds him that Grid's connections have never caused problems, so he explains to the protagonist that he must place a sword on his shoulder to declare him as his subject. The protagonist grants Rabbit the title of Viscount of the Eternal Kingdom, but since it will be Grid who pays his salary, he orders him to be loyal only to him. Rabbit swears loyalty and also promises the loyalty of all his descendants. We see that the windows inform that Rabbit has become a Viscount and the protagonist will have to grant a monthly salary of 500 gold. If he does not pay it, his loyalty will decrease. The protagonist is surprised by Rabbit's skills and is happy to have brought him here. The The newly appointed Viscount requests to express his suggestions and reveals that, coming here, he was able to see the situation of Raydan. Although the process of reviving agriculture is surprising, Rabbit thinks it is excessive. Lowell is surprised and explains that they urgently need to increase the economy of this city through agriculture, and then they can advance to become a trading city. For this reason, they focused on cultivating the fastest-growing and highest-yielding products. Rabbit responds that there is a limit to the number of products that can be cultivated in this hot climate, so it is not appropriate for Raydan to be an agricultural city. He questions whether they will really be able to feed the 20,000 citizens if they reduce the scale of current agriculture to 1/3. He explains that cultivating the fastest-growing and highest-yielding products is not very profitable, as these can be easily obtained anywhere. It is not a competent strategy. Lowell, for her part, tries to show her point of view and comments that the only thing Raydan has is its vast lands, and these are the only way to raise funds to obtain small profits that will stimulate the economy. Lowell asks Grid if he is sure that the subject he brought is good at business, to which Grid offers the sword of the Great Lord to observe Rabbit's statistics. Lowell takes the sword, uncertain that the second-in-command of a second-rate company can understand her plans, but upon seeing Rabbit's skills, she is completely shocked. We see that Rabbit is an NPC at level 307 with the title of Rich Merchant, the largest and richest merchant of this era. He has amazing skills, but even more surprising are his abilities. He has the Serenity skill of Rank A+, with which he maintains composure in any situation, Detection of Rank A+, with which he can see the essence of humans and objects, can easily communicate with anyone, and always achieves the best results. He also has Administration of Rank S, with which he can excellently manage a city, Business Acumen of Rank S+, with which his business ability has reached the highest level and can turn a piece of junk into a commercial product, and his last skill is Wisdom of the Great Merchant of Rank SS, with which he possesses the experience and knowledge of someone who has built a great company. Lowell is impressed with Rabbit's S+ and SS commercial skills, but even more so that Rabbit possesses S-rank administrative skills, especially since even Winston's administrator has only B rank in that area. He can't fathom how the protagonist found someone like Rabbit. Grid had expected him to be an honorable NPC. His skills are so remarkable that they give Grid a headache just thinking about whether to use him as an administrator or a merchant. Lowell has no choice but to admit it and decides he will help in the fields so that Grid can appoint Rabbit as the administrator of the great city of Raydan. Grid asks why, since Lowell could handle that, so Rabbit could create a company affiliated with Raydan. Lowell explains that he lacks administrative skills, which makes a significant difference in managing a city. Moreover, an administrator must deal with diplomatic issues, and Rabbit's skills will be very useful in those cases. Rabbit comments that they will need alchemy facilities to create the goods they plan to export, which piques the protagonist's curiosity. Lowell deduces that it does not refer to the things that will be harvested and explains that they first need to be self-sufficient before they can export any products. Although the merchant explains that there is a large amount of resources around, Lowell thinks of something and cannot believe it. After all, isn't Raydan surrounded by sand? Rabbit asks, suggesting selling it. Lowell deduces that they intend to turn the sand into some object to sell it and explains that sand can be used for building construction, but it must be ocean sand, as desert sand is too fine. Regarding alchemy, he also explains that, according to alchemists, desert sand has no value, so no one would buy something so useless. Rabbit states that the people of the Bhutan barony in the Saharan Empire would buy it if offered, something Lowell cannot believe. Rabbit mentions that they would buy it because they would have no other option. This leaves Lowell bewildered, not understanding what this guy is thinking. Rabbit asks Cam's age to confirm that he is 70 years old and praises him for looking so good at such an advanced age. Rabbit mentions that the Bhutan barony is the most visited region by nobles from the Saharan Empire, explaining that while they may have different interests, they share one in common: health. He proposes that the reason the commoners of Raydan have survived in this desert for the last 10 years is the sand, suggesting using the Elder as evidence of the product's effectiveness, exclaiming that now they just need to collect sand and sell it as an expensive medicine for a long life. Grid had already imagined that Rabbit would plan something like this and gives him a free hand to execute the plan. Lowell, on the other hand, believes that no one in their right mind would buy this. Then, a month later, reviewing the results, Grid is surprised because the medicine for a long life worked. Lowell is surprised because it is selling well at an absurd price of 3 gold for 10 grams, but senses that this could become a problem later. Rabbit explains that it will be fine since it is a very small amount of money for the nobles, and since there is no way to know how long a person will live, there is no way to prove it is a fraud. Lowell is impressed because the guy made them earn gold in a month with this method. Even if it is little money for the great city, the net profit is almost 100%. Lowell believes he is a true con artist. Rabbit is disappointed because the number of healthy individuals visiting the Button barony was lower than expected. Lowell explains that eventually, people will realize it is just sand, and others will also try to sell Raydan sand. This does not convince Rabbit, who doubts that anyone would be foolish enough to sell sand so shamelessly as they do, and even if such a person existed, they would soon realize it is useless to sell sand. Then we see another merchant being chased by giant desert worms, introduced as Mudo, the third place in the merchant ranking and owner of a small business. He wonders what kind of place this is, as he spent a lot of money hiring these warriors, but they are already on the brink of annihilation without even having reached Raydan. The guy thinks that recently the sales of products sent to tourists in the Button barony have plummeted, and the culprit is this expensive medicine for a long life that is just packaged sand. Merchant Mudo does not know who did this but praises the great idea. He does not remember seeing such a skilled merchant in Raydan. Mudo takes some desert sand, trying to recover the investment he made hiring the warriors who escorted him. Then, they go to a shop, and the owner questions Mudo if he is trying to deceive, something the merchant does not understand, as he is selling the same thing. However, the merchant explains that the medicine for a long life is collected in the central region of Raydan, and Mudo does not have the seal certifying that the sand is from that area. He reprimands the merchant for trying to deceive with that insignificant sand, and from now on, they will stop doing business with Mudo's company. The merchant thinks it was a failure and cannot believe who set this up to sell simple sand. Mudo lost a place to do business and, as a merchant, recognizes it was a great idea. Returning to Raydan, Lowell is surprised because they really implemented a seal on the bottles and thinks that Rabbit is taking this too far. Grid responds that they are still in deficit, lacking facilities and people. Moreover, he manufactured many agricultural tools to increase supplies but cannot see economic gains. Lowell advises the protagonist not to focus on losses and see this as an investment for the future. Then, he thinks that Can seems younger every day and perhaps Raydan is a place that increases vitality. But Grid explains that Old Can is a special case and asks about the amount of medicine they sold. Lowell reveals that they earned 1230 gold. This is not enough to cover 25% of Rabbit's salary, who receives 6,000 gold for his work as an administrator and for being a viscount. This is the main cause that is delaying Raydan's recovery. Despite having sworn loyalty to the protagonist, he is meticulous in ensuring he receives his salary every month. Then, Grid wonders why the potato he is eating is so delicious, and Yuroi explains that it is the rainbow potato they are growing in Raydan. Soon, they will be able to export it thanks to the water source that Lord Piero found and the agricultural team that Grid formed. The land has become more fertile, and they have solved the hunger problem, as vegetation has begun to grow everywhere. The desert sand and endemic diseases have started to decrease. He informs that people's lives have begun to improve thanks to the harvests, which is proof that the city is recovering. Grid mentions that he has been so busy that he has not had time to see the surroundings, but this seems so unreal to him. Yuroi exclaims that citizens are praising Grid, and he is proud to serve him. He thinks that initially, he followed him to pay off a debt, but his sense of pride is rising again. Thanks to Grid, life is returning to Raydan, fulfilling everyone's wish. Thanks to the Overgeared clan, monsters have not returned to be a threat to Raydan, and thanks to Jude, a small, growing and powerful army has begun to form. In the blacksmith, thanks to Khan, many talented young blacksmiths have been trained, and Euphemina has helped in many ways by copying the skills of others. Lady Bai Ran, Jishuka, performed exceptionally well in progressing through the Forest Guardian raid and subjugating the ice orcs. Because of this, the clan's warehouse was filled with minerals, and there were also many sylph scales to make a zip-up hoodie for each clan member. Grid decides not to worry immediately but to take significant steps toward the future. Gradually, they must reclaim the West, starting with Raydan. And if they obtain more territories from the kingdom, they could earn a lot of money later. Then, we transport to the protagonist's royal house, where Grid goes to the room and sees his parents peeling garlic for the store, as usual, and decides to help them. The father mentions that this is their job and that Grid should rest, as he is very busy with his. Although the protagonist expresses that he is not that tired and wants to help, the parents sense that Grid will ask for something in return, and he responds that he will not. He does not know what image his parents have of him. The father explains that it is not common to see Grid helping at home, and the protagonist holds a head of garlic thinking that these are the products his parents will sell in the store. Although the outer skin is hard, the skin that surrounds each garlic is thin, making them difficult to peel. Grid thinks of using his fingers as a lever and using his strength properly so as not to damage the garlic clove. Grid peels a multitude of garlic in an instant and realizes that nowadays people do not buy garlic unless it is peeled. Things that require prior hard work can be sold at a higher price. Then, Grid asks if something happened upon seeing that his parents seem surprised, and the mother asks when Grid became so skilled with his hands. Before, it used to take several hours to peel a single garlic. Grid has just sat down but has already peeled more garlic than his father in an instant, and this is after his father has worked for decades in the vegetable store. The protagonist remembers that it is true. It used to take much longer in the past, and he does not know why he has improved so much when the only thing he did was work with his hands in the blacksmith. Then, he questions whether this is an influence of the dexterity statistic and if the real world can be influenced by things from Satisfy. The story continues with Grid, after having helped his parents and dined, now intending to see how his fan club is doing. Grid cannot believe that the dexterity statistic has an effect in real life, remembering having heard that some people improve their swordsmanship after practicing in Satisfy. The protagonist blushes at the thought that in real life he could also use this special and secret technique. Then, he is surprised to realize that he now has over 2 million members in his fan club. Undoubtedly, becoming the first Duke of Satisfy has brought him a lot of popularity. He marvels at how many people in the world are curious or interested in him, a feeling that pleases our protagonist. Then, he enters No's fan club, being surprised because it has 2.75 million members, a complete madness. Although this time the protagonist does not feel envy, as he is No's master. In a comment, Grid draws attention. It seems they are criticizing his knowledge of pets in Satisfy. A professional wrote an analysis in No's fan club, detailing the reasons why Grid is ignorant and knows nothing about pets. A pet changes shape and becomes stronger as it levels up. However, No's appearance has not changed since the international competition. They believe Grid does not know how to raise No properly. Perhaps the main reason is that he has been busy filming commercials and appearing in the media and has not dedicated much time to Satisfy. Grid is bothered by the comment and exclaims that he stopped appearing in the media some time ago and is now busy working in Ray-Dan. Apparently, Grid's knowledge of high-level pets is extremely low. In the case of low-level pets, their loyalty decreases if they are away from their owner for too long, and if loyalty decreases too much, the pet returns to a wild state. Therefore, if a user cannot spend much time with their pet when disconnected, for example, it is better to store the pet in the inventory. But in the case of high-level pets like a Uaverni, their loyalty does not decrease even if the pet is separated from its master, meaning Uavernis are allowed to move freely, and when you raise one, you often let it roam free to kill monsters alone and gain levels. No is a pet superior to Uavernis, so it should also have the benefit of great freedom to gain levels. Moreover, not allowing No to move freely is an insult to No. Grid does not deserve to be the master of a high-level pet, wrote the user on the forum. Grid, for his part, reasons that he did not want to take No out because he did not want to share the experience with him, but the protagonist did not know that high-level pets did not lose loyalty and could hunt alone. Grid confirms that his knowledge about pets is terrible and thanks the person for having read this article. With No's image in his head, Grid remembers that he only takes him out to feed him, but the rest of the time he is in the inventory, and the protagonist thinks it must have been suffocating for No. He thanks the guy who wrote the article but will not let them insult him and starts to respond with insults back to the guy. In the castle of Ray-Dan, he is high with joy, exclaiming to be the most powerful demon beast from hell, and asks his master if it is time to eat. Grid, for his part, observes that No leveled up many times during the Golem invasion, but his current level has stagnated at 35. The protagonist explains to No that they are in a place called Ray-Dan and comments that it is full of delicious monsters. He catches the attention of the little cat. Grid orders No that if he finds anything suspicious while wandering around, he must report it. He mentions that he can eat as many monsters as he wants, but he is not allowed to harm humans. Then, an idea crosses No's mind, and the protagonist confirms that he is free to fly as much as he wants, but he must return immediately as soon as he calls. No sheds a few tears of happiness at the idea of being able to move freely in the world of Satisfy, instead of being trapped in the Grid's inventory. He bursts out of the castle of Ray-Dan with great momentum, capturing the attention of the inhabitants. A small black creature begins to be seen in the sky of the crescent Ray-Dan. No flies high, praising the kindness of his master, whom he considers the best master in the world. In the future, this day would be remembered as the day the guardian angel of Ray-Dan appeared for the first time before the citizens. The summary continues in the capsule room of the real world. Two girls rush out hooded at high speed. One of them exclaims that doing this in secret 3 times a week is really difficult, but she assumes she can't avoid it due to media attention after the battle in Reinhard. Jerem exclaims that today was really fun, and her friend Sarah completely agrees. She was able to use her new ability and had a great time. Sarah mentions that she is already at level 70, while Jerem has risen to level 51. She asks if they leveled up so quickly thanks to the grid's items. Jerem explains that their classes also have a lot of synergy and can do many things despite their low levels. It is then that a voice recognizes the girls as Ruby and the sexy schoolgirl, catching the attention of Grid's sister. Apparently, they are a bunch of cocky boys who exclaim that the night is just beginning. They invite the girls to play Satisfy together for fun. Jerem responds mockingly, exclaiming that they already have their own friends to play with. One of the boys asks if she is referring to Grid's bastard, who always monopolizes the pretty girls, while his companion exclaims that they shouldn't mess with that narcissist. He was worried that they might encounter guys like that due to their popularity. So, he came to pick them up out of concern, but sees that what he feared has indeed happened. A voice exclaims, catching the boys' attention. It is the protagonist Grid, who orders the boys to back off if they don't want him to call the police. He threatens, saying he already has the number on his phone and just needs to press the button to call, but his phone unexpectedly runs out of battery, leaving the protagonist in trouble. The group of boys feels very lucky to encounter the famous Grid, but they see that the protagonist is not satisfied with just playing with Yura and Jishuka, who came for more. Grid curses his bad luck, acting this way because he trusted the police, but now he will have to face these guys alone. In the past, Grid only took the hits and had never hit anyone in real life. He thinks that this capsule room was perfect to come play because no one passes by and recognizes him, but now that factor works against Grid, as there is no one to ask for help. It is the worst scenario. Grid decides to try to persuade the boys and orders them to leave the girls alone if they don't want trouble. One of the guys grabs Sarah and exclaims that they are not committing any crime, they just want to talk, but Grid's sister screams for them to let her go. This act greatly infuriated our protagonist, who warns the bastard that he will kill him, but the guy responds that Grid has become so famous that stories of how they used to bully him in school are all over the internet. Grid is determined and understands that he is the only one who can defend the girls in this situation. He must fight, so he orders the guy again to let her go. One of the bullies approaches Grid, murmuring that the protagonist is famous and rich, so he should be grateful that other people like them can recognize him. He takes the opportunity and tries to hit the protagonist by surprise, mocking Grid, shouting for him to try to do that Pagma thing here. The protagonist, in turn, does not know the limit of his current abilities, so he strikes the guy with great speed. This leaves everyone present dumbfounded. Even the protagonist is surprised by what just happened. The humiliated bully tries to hit Grid again, thinking it was luck. Grid confirms that he could see the blow coming in his direction. It is the same feeling he had yesterday while fighting. It is different from when he uses a sword, but the muscles should be able to be used the same way. Then, he remembers how Piero taught him that if he concentrated his strength in his legs and hips, he could move the upper part of his body more quickly. He tries to use this in real life and imagines that his hand is a sword, using Piero's teachings. Grid strikes a precise blow on the bully again. He loses his balance from Grid's impact, and our protagonist celebrates that it worked. The other bullies do not know what the hell is happening and think that Grid must be using some kind of trick, but they immediately receive a blow from reality. Grid reasons that he is still weak, but his visual acuity has improved. He can see all the movements of the subjects. Hitting the idiot in front of him, he thinks this is the pleasant feeling he felt when pushing his body to the limit when he went to Corco Island. Grid started training at home to be able to experience that feeling again. Now, Grid's muscles respond better and are helping in the fight. The bullies confirm that Grid is not only skilled but also hits hard, dominating the guys. Grid thinks they are weak and that he can do this, mocks the bullies, and asks if they didn't want to fight. The protagonist has also become stronger in reality, so he tries to remember the movements he makes when he is Grid and thinks it is possible. Now, the protagonist could even replicate the foot movements of Pagma's sword dance, but Grid's body does not respond. Then, one of the bullies charges at the protagonist and shouts not to be so arrogant. The protagonist is knocked down and beaten on the ground, while he wonders if this is the limit of his body and if he is unable to withstand Pagma's dance, or maybe all of this was just his imagination. Then, he sees how his sister Sarah is crying and thinks he must protect her. although he remembers his current situation and thinks it would be better for the girls to call the police. Unexpectedly, someone asks the bullies if it is not enough, and the guys stop, surprised. Suddenly, everyone is knocked down by a powerful kick to the jaw. She warns the guys not to underestimate the kicks of a professional in 3rd Dan Taekwondo, equivalent to a black belt in karate. The girl exclaims that it would be easy for her to break the nose of guys like them. It is Yeren, who threatens that she has already called for reinforcements and asks if they want to continue with this. The guys grab their companion and decide to withdraw before people start to gather, surprised by the girl's strength. The girls try to help the protagonist up and ask if he is okay. Grid responds that if Yeren is a 3rd Dan Taekwondo professional, she could have stopped them earlier. Jerem replies that a minor should not interfere in a fight between adult men and, with a smile, mentions that Grid was great. For a second, the protagonist thought he was inside the game and wonders if he could have made those kinds of movements thanks to his training. He contests that it was not surprising and was just a fight of one against all. He thinks it must be impossible for the senses unsatisfied to be connected to those of reality. Jerem asks Grid if he can get up, and the protagonist replies that he will lean on her shoulder. He also forbids the girls from coming back to this capsule room, so he will buy a capsule for each of them. Jerem blushes at feeling Grid using her as support to get up and is totally embarrassed to have the protagonist so close. Grid questions if she is going to help him get up or not. Jerem expresses that Grid is really amazing, and Grid does not know what the girl is saying. "Now, hurry up and help me," said the beaten protagonist. In the Satisfy news, they welcome to talk about the members of the Overgeared Guild, who have been the talk of the town recently. The top 100 of the unified ranking has experienced surprising changes. All members of the Overgeared Guild have been increasing their ranking at an unprecedented speed. They have risen 10 positions and now most of them are in the top 40. This is a cataclysm in the ranking. Although the top 7 remains the same, it is speculated that the Overgeared Guild has been gaining levels at a surprising speed, thanks to hunting powerful monsters in the west of the Eternal Kingdom. Rumors say that only a group of rankers of level 280 or higher can enter that zone and survive, so it can be assumed that almost no user wants to go to Raydan because of those monsters, and the flow of population to Raydan is almost non-existent. They then deduce that Duke Grid must be going through many problems going with the protagonist. The Prota thinks that the cataclysm in the ranking is exaggerated, and what he does not understand is how no one has entered the top 7 yet with the items he forged himself. On the other hand, he thinks it is true that they have taken advantage of all the rewards from hunting in this territory, and it has already been 4 months since the protagonist arrived in Raydan. Tobias was the last to update. All members of the former Sadaka Guild have already reached level 300. Then, Grid remembers that he now only has 3 things left to do: the class mission, the Pobranayam, and Piero's revenge. Someone asks Grid how much longer he will have to stay in this place, and Grid remembers the boy, who is the greatest. The protagonist exclaims that he has a task for him. He will designate a guard for the young man and orders him to explore the west of the kingdom to see if he can find any golem labyrinth. The boy responds that, by guard, Grid must be referring to those in charge of watching over him. Grid comments to the boy that if he swears loyalty, he will give him more freedom, but the greatest responds that if he wants him to swear loyalty, he must be at least a king. The protagonist remembers that the boy has the talent ability that will reveal itself, and understands that the boy is trying to say that he is so talented that Grid is not worthy of his talent. The protagonist will take this into account and orders him to go explore, an order that the young greatest obeys. Grid reasons that not even Yura knows the whereabouts of Yatin's first servant, so he cannot proceed with the class mission. He assumes that it would be best to start with Piero's revenge. The 30 blacksmiths that can his training will continue to manufacture the necessary supplies, and once the protagonist finishes the 5 items that the guild members requested after completing their 3rd class advancement, Grid will have finished with his pending tasks. Activating his legendary blacksmith creation ability, he decides that the time has finally come to create what he has been preparing for. We see in the window that the protagonist has already used this ability to create 12 objects out of the 15 he has to create. Grid designed boots with a rating between epic and legendary. These boots reduce the protagonist's mobility in exchange for giving him more defense. They are boots designed by a legendary blacksmith, crafted with a perfect combination of steel, black iron, and blue orichalcum, which is why they have overwhelming defense. However, their weight severely affects freedom of movement. They are level 320, the main material is steel, which will be combined with blue orichalcum to create heavy boots that will be strong and durable. The protagonist considered Piero's advice to create this new item with his legendary blacksmith creation ability. These boots are not as useful as Braham's boots, but they have exceptional defense, comparable to 2/3 of the defense provided by a set of the same rating. Grid reasons that even if his freedom of movement is affected, it has great synergy with a great sword. The protagonist does not have mobility skills, and his combat style consists of hitting and being hit, so it is a perfectly designed item for him. The protagonist has crafted over 600 items in the last 4 months, and his dexterity stat has surpassed 3,000 points, getting closer to becoming a true legendary blacksmith. In front of the window that asks for the name he will give to the boots, Grid is proud of his work, and from now on, the items he creates with this ability will bear his name. He will call this item Grid's Boots. Then, we are transported to the Vatican, where we see a sad Damien who remembers that precisely for this reason he told her that they should seal the Spear of Lifel. He asks Isabel why so much is demanded and if the church's orders are more important than her own life. Lying in bed, we see Rebecca's daughter, Isabel, who is really worn out. White transformation is an ability possessed by the 3 divine artifacts of the Rebecca Church. Thanks to this ability, Rebecca's daughters can borrow the power of the goddess. It is an ability that grants immense power, but at the same time consumes the user's life energy, as it poses a great burden on the human body. Because the seal of the Spear Lifel was removed a year ago, Isabel has remained in a state of white transformation and is slowly dying. Amid tears, Damian laments that the girl has even lost her hearing and cannot hear his voice, all of this shortly after turning 18. "How much longer will you stay by the side of this tool?" asked a voice to Damian. It was Pascal, the 11th leader of the Juder Church, after the death of Pope Drevigo. Pascal aspired to the papacy with the support of his father, a former viscount of the Saharan Empire who became a count after his son became the 11th leader of the church. This was the perfect opportunity for the largest religious group in the West to fall into the hands of the Saharan Empire. The 5th Pope, Franz, sealed the divine artifacts after seeing the effects they caused, but Pascal convinced the elders that the church weakened because of this and is now preventing the Lifel spear from being sealed again. Damian believes that Isabel is dying because of him and warns Pascal to stop treating Rebecca's daughters as mere tools. The Pope responds that they are just educated and trained tools to wield the 3 divine artifacts and use their life energy to borrow the goddess's power. Damian asks Pascal not to be swayed by the useless sympathy for Pope Franz, but Pascal confesses that he has already decided to seek Pagma's successor and ask him to release the seals of the other artifacts. Damian emphasizes that Rebecca's daughters are not tools. They have always used their powers for the good of the Rebecca Church, and the goddess will not forgive Pascal's attitude. Damian declares that Pascal will never have his approval, while Pascal asserts that a mere paladin seduced by the beauty of the tools should not speak on behalf of the goddess Rebecca. Damian orders him to be silent and promises to destroy the elder's repugnant vision, becoming Pope for Isabel, Rin, and Luna. Then, a window shows that he has accepted the mission to become the SS rank Pope. The favorite candidate for the future Pope Pascal is planning to use the Rebecca Church as a political tool. You, as the agent of the goddess, must have the ambition for Pascal, Damian, to become Pope in the papal election that will take place in 3 months. As rewards, he will receive a 2nd degree of Pope, the armor of the goddess Rebecca, the helmet of the goddess Rebecca, and the gloves of the goddess Rebecca. If he fails in the mission, Pascal will become Pope, and the Rebecca Church will decline even further in the days of Drevigo. Pascal wonders when this boy obtained so much divine power and if it is the power of the goddess's agent. Amid laughter, he exclaims that he will accept, as the goddess's agent also has the right to aspire to be the next pope. He warns the boy that more than half of the votes belong to him, Pascal, but hopes that this experience will help the young man see that his foolishness is merely the work of his folly. He has an order for Rebecca's daughter, Isabel, informing her that a temple of Yatin has been discovered in the vicinity of a village called Kent, located in the Saharan Empire, and orders Isabel to take care of it. Upon receiving no response, he asks if the girl cannot hear him, then asks the elders to write this order. Damian shouts, asking what Pascal is doing. Pascal explains that he is making the most of his white transformation. Before his life energy runs out, he asks the boy not to worry, as they already have a substitute when his life energy runs out. Damian curses the bastard and exclaims that he himself will take on the tasks assigned to Isabel. Pascal responds that going against an order from the elders acting on behalf of the Pope is, essentially, going against the Pope himself. Damian mentions that he is the agent of the goddess and proclaims himself the most suitable to act in place of the Pope. Pascal reasons that if the boy wants to go to the battlefield on his own, It is better for him, as being away from here will decrease his chances of winning the election. He then accepts the boy's proposition and warns him to do it properly while handing over a letter. The leader of the Juder church hints that if Damian fails, these responsibilities will return to Isabel's hands. We return to the great forge of Raydan, where Grid has finished forging the legendary blacksmith's craft. The testimony of a level 5 god's weapon increased the statistics of the crafted item by 19%. The protagonist sighs in relief for finishing his work while wiping the sweat from his face. He crafted a unique item, so all his statistics will permanently increase by 4 points. Reputation across the continent increased by 150 points, totaling 25,110 reputation points, and he will be able to use the reputation shop upon exceeding 30,000 points. The protagonist can assume it was a success, despite there being no legendary items after the 630 items crafted in the last 4 months. This is the 5th unique item crafted, which grants 438 defense points, although it reduces movement speed by 10% and evasion rate by 7%. Still, it increases defense by 12% against attacks to the lower body while wearing it. There is a 25% chance of failure in movement skills, and defense will increase by 15% in dark places. The special event that occurs every 5 legendary items crafted decreases the statistics that the protagonist receives per created item. Grid has already crafted 8 legendary items so far and does not know what kind of penalty will be applied when he crafts a total of 10 legendary items. Considering the overall performance, creating unique items is better than creating legendary ones, which represents less stress for Grid. The protagonist does not wish to be weakened again, so he does not want to create more legendary items. Khan's apprentice blacksmiths are amazed by Duke Grid's work, praising him. He knows that low-level blacksmiths cannot fully understand his work, but they are progressing faster than he imagined, probably thanks to Khan's teaching. Grid thinks that at least 6 of them will become advanced blacksmiths, which will be a great help. He decides to enhance these boots, as he will use them for a long time before completing the set. The protagonist has the ability to increase the probability of enhancing an item, so it will not be very difficult to do so. The price of enhancement stones has increased and now costs about $800,000 to enhance an item to the maximum. Remembering that the news reported that the demand for enhancement items from high-level users has increased drastically, as it is becoming increasingly difficult to level up. Therefore, the protagonist plans to acquire a stock of enhancement stones in case the probability of obtaining them decreases even further. The boys sigh, and Grid asks why they seem so depressed. They explain that while they are crafting the boots and gloves that Count Lowell requested, they cannot help but think that their work is just trash compared to Duke Grid's. They then ask the protagonist that, if it is not too much trouble, to teach them how to do it so they can imitate him. Grid did not expect this proposal, as it is uncomfortable since they are already receiving teachings from Khan, and he does not want to interfere. However, someone places a hand on his shoulder. It is Elder Khan, who asks the protagonist not to worry about him and to teach something to the novices, who are just starting, like he did in the past. Blacksmith Grid thinks it is true and can see himself in the past in these boys. Determined, he will show the young ones how he crafts the boots that the novices have been making for Count Lowell. Meanwhile, in the Vatican, Damian says goodbye to Isabel, promising that he will return soon. The girl manages to murmur Damian's name with great effort, and the boy assures her that he will succeed to return very soon, exclaiming that he is strong and will protect her at all costs. Then, Isabel asks if he remembers the person who brought divine punishment upon Drevigo when no one else could and saved the Rebecca Church. She remembers that it was also thanks to him that she could become an agent of the goddess. He is the only person who can seal the Leifel spear. Upon seeing the mission, he realizes that the mission's destination is a place near the eastern side of the empire, but it is also close to the western side of the Eternal Kingdom. We return to the great city of Raydan, where the young blacksmiths praise how incredible Grid is, unable to believe that the protagonist crafted this work of art so easily. A window informs that the breath of the legendary level 4 blacksmith has been activated, increasing the statistics of the crafted item by 9%. The legendary blacksmith skill, Witness of a level 5 god's weapon, has also been activated, further increasing the statistics by 19%. Grid crafted a pair of simple steel boots of legendary quality, and since he crafted a legendary item, all his statistics will permanently increase by 10 points. Reputation across the continent will increase by 500 points, while the rest praise the skills of the legendary blacksmith. Grid thinks that because of this, he can now only craft one legendary item before it gets nerfed again. He wasted an opportunity on a trash item. On the same day, among the countless stories in Satisfy, The determination of a man began a new story, a story that narrated his adventures and those of another protagonist. Damian thinks he might find Grid there and will find him, asking Isabel to wait for him, as he will bring the only person who can help them at this moment, the legendary blacksmith. Later, we see Grid walking through the city, lamenting that a pair of simple steel boots came out with legendary quality and cursing his bad luck again. He then decides to prepare to fight against the Knights of the Saharan Empire, who are indeed powerful, although Grid does not have much money. He has already used most of the materials from the guild's warehouse, and the money he obtained as a reward for the golem invasion has already been used by the guild. He remembers that he also sold most of his items at the beginning to be able to have the items he has now. He cannot believe that he has only about 20,000 gold left. But no matter how many times he reviews his inventory, he cannot find anything to sell. Then, he comes across an item called Essence of the Goddess, and wonders if he can sell it, but since he cannot evaluate the item with his skill, he does not know what it might be used for. Grid obtained it by defeating Drevigo and reasons that it could be valuable. He assumes that a certain person must know something about it. Back at the castle, Rabbit mentions that, as a merchant, he trusts his ability to recognize the value of most things, but even he has no idea what value this might have. Grid asks if he can sell it, and Rabbit replies that, considering it is an object that contains the divine power of the goddess Rebecca, he suggests to Grid not to sell it so carelessly. The protagonist explains that he needs money for the enhancement stones, and Rabbit decides to show something that might interest Grid. Grid recognizes the map they have been working on for the last 4 months and can see that the West Desert is indeed vast. Rabbit comments that if they are able to restore the desert by exterminating the giant worms, Grid would be able to achieve a feat comparable to the exploits of the founder and supreme ruler of the North, King Lauren, according to information obtained from the imprisoned administrator. There is a yellow mithril mine in the area that Rabbit points out on the map. They also believe that the villages discovered south of the Event River are mining settlements. It is then that the new administrator asks Grid if he remembers when he requested half of the guild's funds for alchemy facilities. He justifies that if they can develop synergy between alchemy and Grid's blacksmithing skills, they could turn Raydan into a second Talima. Grid is surprised to remember that Talima is the city of the dwarves, said to have all kinds of battle equipment. He also recalls that it was said that no human can enter there because it is in the territory of Traga, the fire dragon. Although Grid also remembers that the materials for alchemy are expensive and the success rate is low, he said he needed money to buy enhancement stones. He then asks why Rabbit is talking about all this, since he is unaware of these things, and that is why he tasked Rabbit with it. The administrator, Rabbit, thinks that as a governor, Grid shows little interest in almost anything, even if they are very tempting plans, but he trusts his subordinates, those he has chosen for each area. This is the characteristic that an ideal governor needs. He then explains that fairy dust is a material that significantly increases the success rate in alchemy and can be made from yellow mithril. Grid thanks him for the information but does not understand why Rabbit keeps talking about alchemy, to which Rabbit responds that through alchemy, they can create enhancement stones. This idea catches Grid's attention, as he did not know there was another way to obtain them besides drops from boss monsters. Rabbit explains that they can be crafted through alchemy. The probability of success is extremely low, but things could be completely different if they have yellow mithril. This excites the protagonist, who proposes to reclaim that territory immediately, asking if the mine is south of the Event River. Rabbit comments that there is a problem, as the exploration group they sent to the mines was forced to retreat after being defeated by a monster. Grid responds that they already knew that the monsters in that area are indeed powerful, so they will have to send the Overgeared clan. The exploration group that was defeated was from the Overgeared clan, Rabbit reveals, taking a sip from his cup. This surprises Grid, who knows that the clan members are in the top 40 of the unified ranking and have even completed their third-class advancement. He does not understand how they were annihilated. It was not long ago that Regis completed his third-class advancement and became an Ashura. The martial artist wanted revenge for the fight they had in the international competition. He became ridiculously powerful, and Grid won precisely thanks to his immortality passive and Piero's training. Rabbit continues to explain that the strength of this monster transcends imagination, and that is why he recommended something, but Grid interrupts him, believing he knows what he is going to say. Grid understands that it is time to unite the exploration clan and decides to leave immediately. Later, Grid exclaims the name Doppelganger and asks the guys if that is the monster that made them retreat. Pawn confirmed what Grid said, explaining that it is a monster. Piero responds affirmatively, explaining that it is a monster that transforms by copying the appearance and abilities of its target, and the monster copied the appearance of someone more powerful than them, which is why they could not defeat it. Regis explains that this thing uses a sword as big as Dawn's sleeves and is as strong and fast as Grid. Although Faker corrects that the monster's swordsmanship was superior to the protagonist's, Grid reasons that the entire clan faced the monster and had to retreat, so he wonders if it is at the level of Hell Gao in its strongest form. At this, Piero exclaims that he will also go with them, and the protagonist is moved to see that the swordsman has improved his appearance since the last time they met, exclaiming that it is perfect for him to join them on this raid. Vander directly asks why he would have to come, the farmer, and if he has things to do in the field. Lowell, on the other hand, was able to see how impressive Piero was and thinks he will be of great help. He then reasons that Grid plans to use Piero's skills to explore the territory, deducing that the protagonist is becoming wiser. Many people underestimated Grid's power, saying that he became weaker than most of them because they completed their third-class advancement, but the truth is that they are all mistaken. Grid is constantly growing and asks if everyone is ready. Along with the guild guys and Piero, the protagonist mentions that it has been a long time since they had an adventure together. If you don't want to miss the upcoming releases, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This is very important to us, along with your comments. I look forward to seeing you in the next Nerd Recap. Later, in the desert, Vander warns about 4 giant worms to the left, but Regis instantly strikes them down with his fierce lightning of Ashura. Lowell exclaims that it was incredible. The martial artist is no longer at the level of a saint of the fist. He is now a true god of combat. Grid calculates that Regis has become stronger since the last time they fought. It seems he has already gotten used to Ashura, his third-class advancement, and his combat power has practically doubled. And the rest have not fallen behind. Galloping on a camel, Pawn clears the way with his spear skill. Lowell is surprised because the spearman will take out 5 worms in a moment and remembers that Pawn's power increases when he uses a mount. The envious Vander orders the young man not to be surprised by someone who needs the help of an animal. Grid recalls that he also has the passive of Pagma's dance, which passively increases his attack power, but he cannot benefit from it when activating the dance skills. He acknowledges that the spearman is very strong, despite his stats and items being worse than his. Now Grid can feel the difference between himself and a user who has completed their third-class advancement and has the passive weapon mastery skill. Then, Lowell calls Grid to warn that they are being attacked by basilisks from the side. They are the most powerful monsters in this area, and he exclaims that it will be difficult for them to dodge the petrification attack, as the desert sand hinders movement. He proposes to follow the plan and make a detour, but the protagonist charges into the attack. Here the manual explains that the awakening of stats is a system that improves stat performance every 100 levels. For example, each time a user increases their strength stat by 1, their attack power increases by 0.3 and their health by 7 points. But a user who has surpassed level 300 will gain 0.4 and 9 points for each respective point of strength. Because of this, it was not strange that the members of the Overgeared clan, who had already surpassed level 300, had better stats than Grid, who was still at level 275. We see here that the salamanders begin to charge an attack, but the protagonist stops them with his wave skill, thanks to his negative levels at the beginning, item crafting, and all his titles. Grid's total stats are very high compared to the other clan members, and he ends one of the basilisks. Then, the clan members warn Grid that they are surrounding him. Grid dodges an attack from the monsters while performing Pagma's dance, and it is explained to us that the reason Grid was relaxed, despite confirming Regis and Pawn's growth, was that he was sure he would have more advantage when he reached level 300. Because of this, Grid was not anxious and began training again. Then he finishes off another monster using the assassination skill of Pagma's fencing. Pawn is surprised because the attacks were dodged while he performed the sword dance. They cannot believe how much Grid has improved. On the other hand, they do not understand how Grid can move like that in the desert. Faker deduces that it might be due to his new boots and mentions that his attacks are surprisingly powerful. Grid, on the other hand, is trapped between the monsters and orders the boys to stop talking to help him. Then, Piero mentions that he still does not see improvements in Grid's fencing, a comment that leaves Vander perplexed, asking if the farmer has gone mad. The knight exclaims that 200 meters ahead, 2 monster bosses have appeared at the same time, warning the protagonist that numerous desert frogs are also approaching from 800 meters away, so they propose to leave the area. However, the protagonist's response is to advance and finish off the monsters to avoid prolonging this. Finally, the boys arrive at the Event River area. Pawn exclaims, tired, that it has already been 10 hours since they left Raydan. Vander mentions that they would have arrived much earlier if they had used Uroy's terrain recognition skills, but the protagonist wanted to fight all these monsters. Grid murmurs that despite having defeated so many field bosses, they only managed to get 2 epic items and 5 enhancement stones. Pawn, on the other hand, cannot understand how Grid still has so much stamina. Thacker explains to Grid that everyone is tired and stamina recovers very slowly outdoors, so he proposes to camp, which the protagonist accepts, asking them to prepare the tents and something to eat. Vander opens the food and is disappointed to see that it is again rainbow potatoes. He says they are delicious, but they are tired of eating them all the time. But Lowell reminds him that it is the only food available in Raydan, and they need to save money. The bald man mentions that professional chefs are capable of cooking with wild ingredients and monster meats, and their meals even grant certain enhancers, so he asks Grid for a good chef. Grid reasons that they could ask Euphemina to copy the cooking skills, as she has already duplicated many skills to help with blacksmithing and in the city. Although it is not a bad idea to look for a cook, Grid proposes to rest for 4 hours and exclaims that he will be responsible for keeping watch, surprising the boys, who cannot believe that Grid volunteered. Thacker states that Grid should rest, as he will be the center of this raid, so they will take care of the watch. Vander is tired of walking all day, but exclaims that this is his responsibility as the tank of the group. Lowell, on the other hand, proposes that since it is only 4 hours, Mr. Piero should take care of the watch, as he does not participate in the fights. Piero agrees and asks the boys to rest well. Regis comments that they cannot do that. It would be unnecessary to ask a farmer to watch this dangerous place. Still, Grid exclaims that they will be fine, joking that Piero is not an ordinary farmer, but a legendary farmer. Farmers protect their crops from beasts. So, Piero should have a good sense of perception, and they can trust him. The strategist praises Grid's decision. Later at night, Piero watches over the dangers of the desert while the boys rest and sleep. Leaving everything in the hands of a trusted comrade and sleeping, thinks the swordsman, feeling nostalgic as he remembers his days with the Red Knights. Then, he realizes that the forest they are heading to is not far from here. He can feel a great aura coming from there. The next day, Grid asks if this is the mysterious forest from which the boys had to retreat. He does not understand how this bamboo forest has not been affected by desertification. Lowell replies that the doppelganger takes care of blocking the monsters, and thanks to that, the mountain range and the mines behind this forest have been well preserved. Windows inform the boys that they have entered the mysterious forest. His mind calms, but due to the excessive tranquility, he feels powerless. Vander murmurs that this feeling brings him bad memories. The cautious Grid comments that the boys are very sensitive, but Thacker responds that they also felt confident when entering here for the first time. Grid thinks that the boys are exaggerating, but Thacker becomes tense upon noticing that the monster has appeared. The doppelganger is sitting quietly on a stone with its back turned. Grid observes it with curiosity, but a shiver runs down his body as he remembers seeing that silhouette before, in the murals of the Lauren Waterfall Cave. It is none other than Pagma. Grid stands in front of the monster and draws his sword, feeling his heart beating very fast. The protagonist is nervous and agitated, but not out of fear of its murderous intent, but rather from the feeling of admiration and inferiority at being in front of his predecessor. It is instinctive. He remembers his companion's words warning that it wields a sword as large as the Dying Sieve, is as fast and strong as him, but its fencing is superior to his. The protagonist cannot believe that the doppelganger has copied Pagma, although he does not understand how it did so, since the real Pagma died 100 years ago. Grid tries to concentrate, apologizing that what he has in front of him is just an empty shell. Then, the monster looks at Grid with curiosity but immediately attacks the protagonist. Grid barely manages to block the blow and calculates that its destructive power is comparable to Hell Gau's. The protagonist asks Lowell if a doppelganger can perfectly copy the abilities of its target. The strategist replies that if the target is stronger than the doppelganger, then no. The doppelganger's attacks are having an effect, and we see that the durability of Fracasso is decreasing. Grid cannot believe it. The monster is overpowering him, despite being an imperfect copy of Pagma's abilities. And he confirms why he was known as the best swordsman. After a long time, it is the first time that Fracasso has been injured so quickly. The protagonist assumes that the monster's sword is also taking all this damage. Then, Lowell shouts that the items a doppelganger copies are an exception. Its copy is as durable as orichalcum and is capable of regenerating, as it is made from a part of its own body, meaning its weapon is stronger than the original. Grid doubts that the copy is stronger than Pagma's equipment, but curses himself, as Fracasso is the result of 2 hard years of work as a blacksmith, and still feels that he is far from reaching Pagma's level. Vander wants to help, but the effects of the forest significantly reduce their strengths. Pawn exclaims that they can only wait for Grid to hold out until the doppelganger decides to attack them. Then the boys notice that the doppelganger's fencing is very similar to Grid's. Lowell confirms and explains that the doppelganger copied one of the 9 legends of this world and Grid's predecessor, Pagma. He concludes that the invasion of the golems eventually allowed Grid to encounter the doppelganger. It seems that the game had programmed this for Pagma's successor, and Grid will undergo a great change after this battle. The protagonist realizes that Pagma has cornered him, and with no other option, decides to use Pagma's sword dance. However, someone shouts for him not to rush, and the protagonist cancels his attack, avoiding a fatal blow from the doppelganger. Grid thinks that if he had continued with Pagma's dance, the monster's great sword would have easily pierced his heart, and he wonders who warned him. He discovers that the warning came from the swordsman Piero, who explains that the difference between the protagonist and the doppelganger is not that great, and he shouldn't worry too much, as he knows the swordsmanship the monster is using, making it easier to deal with him. The protagonist decides to focus on footwork to predict the monster's next attack, resolves to fight seriously, and follow Piero's teachings. Moreover, he will also pay attention to the monster's shoulder movements. He then manages to predict a strike to his right and successfully dodges a fatal blow, resulting in an effective evasion. Tobias is extremely surprised to see that Grid managed to dodge an attack for the first time in combat, and Faker does not know how he accomplished it. This also leaves the false Pagma completely flustered, as he did not expect anyone to be able to evade his blade. The clan members realize that the protagonist succeeded thanks to Piero's advice and wonder if Piero is just a farmer. Amid all this, Grid uses the skill link of Pagma's swordsmanship. The doppelganger decides to use the same skill, so Grid chooses to use the assassination skill in conjunction, something the false Pagma also decides to do. Both cause a massive explosion with the impact of their attacks. The protagonist curses the copier and decides to use a fusion technique, attacking with the skill Transcend Link, to unleash 20 consecutive strikes. Then Pagma decides to use the rotation skill, and with agile movements of his sword, he manages to dodge Grid's attack, and furthermore, he returns the attack to the protagonist. Grid cannot avoid his own attack and confirms that this is his end. His friends are worried about their leader, who will not be able to regain his composure and will take all the damage from the blow. However, Piero intervenes, blocking all the strikes with his sword. Everyone is surprised by Piero's strength. Grid did not know that Piero was so strong. The swordsman managed to block the Transcend Link skill with relative ease. Piero mentions that this is an opportunity for Grid to learn Pagma's swordsmanship from the insignificant copier. Grid reasons that if Piero is so strong, he should defeat him, but decides to heed his advice and learn more about Pagma's swordsmanship. Piero explains that a great sword is powerful but slow. Thrusting with a great sword is very sensitive, as there are no hidden movements, and Grid should not think too much to respond to this attack. Grid decides to use footwork to move quickly and dodge the attacks. Grid manages to dodge an attack, surprising the doppelganger. Piero comments that when executing a failed attack, he leaves a large opening due to his posture. Grid seizes the opportunity to counterattack and manages to strike the monster's body. Layla is excited to see Pagma's muscles, and Regis thinks he must train much harder to reach that level. Grid makes the most of the weight of his new boots to apply more weight to the tip of his sword, causing a critical damage of 17,790 points to Pagma. However, the blow was not enough to finish off the monster. He recovers and attacks the opening left by Grid's attack. The protagonist finds himself in a high-risk situation again. He did not manage to deal much damage with his normal attack, and the monster has an incredible regeneration ability. Piero intervenes once more, easily blocking Pagma's attack, advising the protagonist to use his golden blades not only to defend but also to attack. He orders Grid to start over and will train him until he becomes a worthy rival. Grid learns hard lessons, understanding that the teachings he will receive will not be free. Grid soon advances against the clone of Pagma, always learning something, but is quickly defeated again. Piero teaches Grid that the upward cutting attack wastes his power, as he also has to overcome gravity, so he deduces that Grid thought of these types of attacks to hit the enemy's blind spots, but these attacks are not convenient for this type of weapon, so he orders Grid to think again. He says that in a battle where your focus is to defeat an opponent with a high degree of durability and life, that is not the best solution, so he tells him to think again. Grid learns the lesson but loses when he reaches the second. It is such powerful and precise swordsmanship that the slightest mistake would mean his death. When the protagonist learns the second lesson, he ends up being defeated in the third. However, Piero comes to his rescue, saving him countless times. Piero mentions that the power of Grid's golden blades is weak, so he proposes using them to block the enemy's field of vision. A thrust should be reserved for situations where one is sure to hit. Hitting the opponent with a great sword is more appropriate using cutting movements. Then, he orders Grid to start over. The protagonist knows that Piero is harsh, but he is giving infinite lives, continuing the training against the clone of Pagma. The guild members notice that Grid is putting in a lot of effort. Tun believes that even with Piero by his side, fighting for more than half a day must be hell for the protagonist. Vander also believes that Grid's stamina will run out if he continues fighting this monster. Faker notes that this is confrontation number 51, and Grid's growth is incredible. The protagonist is avoiding all critical hits. At first, he was completely dominated by the doppelganger, but now Grid is also landing some hits. Pawn mentions that, in this case, they cannot help Grid, as this is a powerful training session. The members notice that Piero is giving lessons to Grid, making him stronger. They cannot believe that the NPC is really just a simple farmer and wonder what his true identity is. Regis comments that he is jealous of Grid for having a powerful NPC teaching him and protecting his life. Then, Grid falls on his back, completely exhausted. He has exhausted his stamina from fighting for half a day. Although Grid's health has decreased by 10%, Piero believes he should let the protagonist rest a bit and then calls Regis. The martial artist does not know if he is really being called by him. Piero mentions that he has been watching him and sees potential in him, so he proposes that Regis face the creature while Duke Grid rests. Regis is excited at the thought that Piero will also train him and thanks him enthusiastically. Vander thought Piero was an NPC who only taught Grid, but he gets excited thinking that they will also have an opportunity. Soon after, we see Piero holding the knocked-out Regis and ordering the next one to step up. The swordsman wants to see how these young ones grow and become stronger so he can practice with them when he becomes the sword saint. Time continued to pass as the young ones grew stronger, and the doppelganger began to feel fatigue after so many confrontations. The doppelganger, unlike humans, is a heteromorphic being. He has protected this forest for the last 100 years and believed that this occasion would be like those in the past. After all, countless humans had invaded the forest, but all were defeated. However, something was different now. He wanted to finish them off and kill them quickly, but they kept getting back up after being defeated. Moreover, among them was one very different. The doppelganger calculated that his power was similar to that of the original Pagma, although it was inferior. He did not know how much longer he could fight against this man, but he had to protect the forest, this mysterious grove, and especially that hill. He had to protect the only person who did not disrespect him but respected him, protecting the increasingly blurred memory of his only light. He had to protect her from humans. Grid attacks, and the doppelganger tries to imitate him, copying the assassination skill. If it was the same skill as the doppelgangers, he would use it faster and employ the assassination skill. But then, Grid quickly changes the form of his dance. The protagonist interrupts the dance for the thrust and switches to a cutting attack. Grid fully impacts his link skill of Pagma's swordsmanship. He praises himself for being incredible and celebrates that the monster's health has fallen below 20%. Piero reasons that a master silently detects the limits of his student. A powerful opponent makes you break your limits, but a perfect opponent makes you forget that you have limits. Piero did not think the monster would make Grid's skills grow to this level and envies him for finding a perfect opponent, but wishes Duke Grid to be careful at this point. Seeing the movements that the doppelganger will make, he deduces that the real fight will begin now. The copy of Pagma begins to assume a completely unknown posture to Grid. He does not know this posture and reasons that it will be a new skill. Pagma steps firmly and uses the pinnacle skill. After that, he unleashes a powerful vertical cut that goes straight for the protagonist. This hits Grid squarely, leaving him unable to react. Grid is severely damaged by the targeted skill, which he cannot avoid. The skill even pierced his light armor, ignoring the defense. This skill is different from the other sword dances that add damage proportional to physical damage. Piero shudders to see that it is a skill that Grid could not avoid. The sword movement was a perfect line. It is the pinnacle of perfect swordsmanship. He reflects that Pagma was a blacksmith who was also very skilled in swordsmanship, and the more Piero sees his swordsmanship, the more he wishes he had known him. Grid comments that he learned the 5 dances of Pagma after seeing them in the murals of the waterfalls. They seem like simple dances, but other people cannot easily imitate them, and even if they cannot activate the effect of the dance. In fact, Pagma's sword dance is very intense and complicated. Grid does not know if it is because he is Pagma's successor or due to the results of this training, but his eyes can clearly see the doppelganger. He proposes to the monster to end this once and for all. He has observed his movements very well, and it is time to show that he is Pagma's successor. The doppelganger cannot believe that Grid has managed to replicate his movements so easily. Grid firmly plants his foot, and Piero is also incredulous that Grid will attempt it after seeing it only once. A window shows Grid that he has learned a new skill. It is then that Grid uses the pinnacle skill of Pagma's swordsmanship. This last one is a sword dance that expresses the essence of a god, inflicting 700% physical damage to a target. This skill ignores 60% of the target's defense, and to use it, one must have a sword-type weapon equipped. The attack that Grid launched seems overwhelming. Due to the damage, he thinks this is a skill that lies between linking and assassinating, but the mana cost and cooldown time are less than those of assassination. Thanks to being a target-directed skill, it will finish off the doppelganger. Although the monster begins to perform another dance of Pagma, it starts to flow with the attack and redirects it to Grid using the rotation skill. The guild members are startled to see that he returned his own attack. Piero curses himself for not being able to arrive in time and thinks that Grid will be hit by the blow he just learned. However, Grid manages to imitate the movements of the doppelganger once again. Piero is surprised because Grid was able to execute this new skill at the perfect moment, a level at which he can stop focusing on controlling his body and start predicting his opponent's movements. Grid uses the rotation skill, which will return all attacks he receives within half a second after the skill is cast, with 100% of the original power. At this moment, the passives of the Failure Sword and the Sacred Gauntlets are activated, managing to impact several consecutive attacks. The blows hit the doppelganger squarely, who cannot react to Grid's overwhelming power. Piero reasons that Grid is growing at a surprising speed and shouts that it is time to finish off the monster. Grid decides to put an end to it and activates the Assassination Link skill, striking with several consecutive critical hits on Pagma's clone. These attacks destroy the monster's body. The doppelganger begins to laugh as it disappears, then closes its eyes, accepting its end. It remembers the first time it met the girl and asked her name, but it can no longer remember that smile. Still, it murmurs that it misses her and the sound of her laughter. As it disappears, it wonders if it will be okay, and a window informs that Grid's stamina has been exhausted due to the maximum number of Assassination Link strikes. Since Grid's stamina is now 0, he will not be able to move. All the guild members have been defeated at least 10 times, but the protagonist has lost 82 times. Finally, they achieved victory after 23 hours and 21 minutes. A window shows that the protagonist defeated the doppelganger of the mysterious forest, which existed for 153 years. A new dawn rises before them after they have pushed their limits. The companions praise the protagonist for being incredible. Grid feels that he is going to die because his stamina is null, and Regis offers a rainbow potato so he can recover. Piero thinks it is a pity not to have been born in the same era as Pagma and Miller, but feels lucky to live in the same era as the person who inherited Pagma's power. He exclaims that Grid is the only person who can help him become the Saint of the Sword. Later, we see that Grid seems curious about the true form of the doppelganger, although it does not seem to have died, as it is still writhing. Lowell reveals that the monster only lost the form of the copied person, but its core remains intact. Once defeated, its abilities and intelligence are massively degraded, so its current state is no different from death. Grid asks if they should kill it, but Lowell believes that its power can still be useful and proposes to let it recover. Grid agrees, determined to see the rewards, which include 6,300 gold, 8.5 million experience points, and about 40 enhancement stones. He also obtained a Guardian's necklace with a unique rating and a unique Guardian's bracelet. These are accessories made by the doppelganger of the mysterious forest, which grant the bearer defense and willpower. Vander exclaims that it is amazing to find an accessory that grants defense to the user. Moreover, they have a very high value, although he is disappointed to see that they have no further effects, despite costing a lot to defeat the doppelganger. Grid reasons that the defense they grant is comparable to that provided by level 300 gloves and boots. It is basically like equipping additional armor. But that is not all, as they offer points to the indomitable statistic. Indomitable grants a certain probability of nullifying a percentage of the damage received. The lower the health, the higher the probability. The effects of these two items are disappointing. Grid has the indomitable statistic at 900 points and still has never seen its effects. Grid thinks that blacksmiths cannot make accessories, so they would still be useful to him. He asks the clan if he can keep them. Tobias replies that no one is interested in them, and since Grid was the main contributor to the raid, he can keep them. Vander also agrees, and Grid thanks the guys. The monster also drops a large doppelganger sword of legendary rank, which grants a great attack power, although it reduces the attack speed by 6%. Among its features, it ignores 20% of the enemy's defense, increases the attack power of skills by 20%, and is level 320. It is a great sword that the doppelganger of the mysterious forest copied, imitating the work of the legendary blacksmith Pagma. But the resemblance is only in appearance. The power is not comparable to Pagma's works. Pawn is surprised by the incredible performance. Grid, for his part, thinks it is certainly surprising because it increases the power of skills by 20%, but it is not as good as failure, so it is not useful to him. Pawn declares that it is a pity that no one in the clan can use it, as, except for Grid, there is no member who fights with a great sword. Tun comments that he tried in the past but could only swing it. He suggests that Grid use the two-sword style. Grid asks if he is referring to wielding two swords at the same time. Lowell replies that Grid can use any weapon, and he is strong enough. Still, the protagonist thinks that if he wields two heavy swords, he will not be able to swing them properly and will end up on the ground. Lowell mentions that Tun uses two claw gauntlets and, along with Piero, can teach him. Moreover, if they consider how the protagonist has improved his skills, he has the potential to surpass imagination. Piero reflects that a two-sword style with two huge swords is theoretically impossible, but it may be possible if they are talking about Pagma's successor. Grid thinks that a sword dance that has the attack power of failure multiplied by the effect of the doppelganger's great sword would be incredible. Although he knows it is a bit exaggerated for him to keep all the items they obtained during the raid, someone tells him not to think too much. The guys in the clan mention that Grid is the only one wielding a great sword in the clan. And although they think about selling it to split the money, they do not like the idea of giving a legendary item to another ranker outside the clan. The guys trust that Grid can handle two giant swords and ask him not to worry about them. Not used to receiving expectations and support, Grid sincerely thanks the guys. Later, the guys stop after advancing a bit into the forest, and Facker comments that they have advanced a lot into the forest and still have not seen anything. Uroi replies that probably the doppelganger made sure no human entered this forest. Then he sees something and warns his lord. The guys found a cabin in the middle of the mountain and do not understand why there is one since no person can enter the forest. Vander enters exclaiming that if there is something strange, it must be explored immediately, although Uroi scolds him for entering strange places without knocking on the door. Inside the cabin, it can be seen that no one has cleaned the place for decades. It seems that someone used to live there, and they decide to take a look. Vander locates an old storage box and finds it suspicious, so he decides to break it open to see what is inside. After hitting it hard, the window informs that nothing happened. Vander cannot believe the hardness of the box, and Lowell deduces that it is locked by the system and they will need the key to open it. Grid, for his part, smells treasure and decides to try to open it. Pawn, in the background, does not know what the protagonist is holding in his hand. Grid inserts the master key he made into the box and opens it, surprising everyone. Inside the box, he can only find an old book. Upon opening it, it seems to be a diary, and from the writing, he deduces that the owner used to be a child. Lowell realizes that the diary starts in the year 259 of the royal calendar, and Grid calculates that this was about 146 years ago. Facker proposes that the protagonist read it since the rest are tired and need to rest. Grid begins to read in the year 259 of the kingdom, June 2nd. At this time of year, the moon vines are already ripe. So I went to collect some in the grove near the entrance of the village. This one should be very sour. I like it, but I'm sure Dad won't like it and will make that funny face again, the girl murmured between laughs. Then the girl stops upon seeing something that catches her attention. I found a grandmother in the grove. I think I saw her before at the market, the girl reported in her diary. I tried to talk to her, but she ran away. Didn't she know how to speak? The confused girl wondered. When she told her father, He said there are scary monsters in the grove and ordered her not to go back there. But if that grandmother ran away after seeing me, am I the scary one? Questioned the naive girl. On July 2nd, I returned to the grove to give rye bread to the suspicious grandmother I met last time. I wonder if she liked the bread. The grandmother looked curiously at the food. July 25th of the year 259 of the kingdom. Today she didn't run away and watched me while I gathered firewood. I saw her yawn. Year 59 of the kingdom. December 20th. It's already snow season. Soon a lot of snow will fall. Is she still wearing summer clothes? The girl asked, sheltering the doppelganger that copied her appearance. She thinks she will have problems if her father finds out, but she will say she lost it. Then the girl smiles and comments that she and the creature now wearing her scarf look like sisters. The girl was surprised because her new friend could transform into the people she saw. Here we learn that the girl's name is Wendy and she named the creature Randy. Asking Randy if the scarf keeps her warm, she taught some words little by little, and she learned very well by copying the movement of the lips. Randy was very smart. Wendy's father found Randy and tried to shoot her with an arrow, but he couldn't when he saw her smile and say hello. Later, he taught her to hunt, and since then Randy brings us a boar every day. It has always been difficult to get food and survive in winter, but this winter has been different with Randy. I am happy with her, Wendy declared in her diary. Pond deduces that the girl named Randy is the doppelganger, and Vander understands that, according to the diary, the monster was gentler in the past. Grid cannot believe that Randy is really the same doppelganger they fought against. The diary continues in the year 260 of the kingdom, May 24th. Today I turned 16 years old. We live peacefully every day. We no longer go hungry. It seems that there will be nothing special for my birthday, but I think Randy is trying to do something for me. Now it is harder to hunt because there are fewer beasts in the mountain. Then she writes that there was a problem with a deer. Apparently, a villager hunted it by shooting an arrow, and it was the same one Randy was trying to hunt. Wendy tried to resolve the misunderstanding but received a slap from the furious hunter. Randy saw all this and got very angry. I managed to calm Randy quickly, stopping her furious attack, but it was very dangerous. Randy is strong. Today she almost killed someone while the hunter fled scared with his prey. Wendy apologized to her friend Randy for yelling at her, saying that if she wants others to respect her, she must also respect them. While Randy inspects her wound, the girl asks her not to hurt anyone else, even if it is for her. She tells Randy that she doesn't want people to be afraid of her. She wants others to treat her well so they can see how kind she can be while trying to calm her friend. She mentions that today is her birthday and proposes to go collect some vines to celebrate. Randy smiles and accepts her friend Wendy's proposal. Wendy comments that, according to a rumor, the hill behind her house is an amazing mine. They used to go to this place to collect vines and did not imagine it was an amazing mine. Wendy reasons that if they start working in the mine, they will need labor, and if that happens, the situation of the villagers will improve. Then she sees an unknown silhouette, and it is the first time she sees this person, wondering if it is a foreigner. In the spring of the year 270 of the kingdom, I met a man with beauty superior to mine. He had an elegant posture and fair skin. He looked like a prince from a fairy tale. He said the following while touching a rock from the mountain. The minds of humans are still very immature to handle this mineral, yellow mithril and pagma. Grid was startled while reading Wendy's diary. Pagma asked the young girls if they lived around there, revealing to the girls that this is a wonderful place. Wendy wondered if Pagma was really a prince or if he was the legendary blacksmith. He asked the girls if they were twins when he noticed something while observing Randy, being able to see her true nature. I see that it is a special place, not just the land, but also its people, exclaimed the curious blacksmith. It seemed that the prince was able to see through things. He said something that Wendy could not understand and left. This mine is very tempting for humans. I have no doubt it will cause a great conflict. I just hope it falls into the hands of a wise person, Wendy wrote in her diary, repeating Pagma's words. The account continues with some soldiers ordering them to kneel to show respect to the lord of these lands. On May 6th of the year 270 of the kingdom, the lord visited the mine to inspect it and, stroking his mustache, murmured that he could not believe there was a mine like this in his territory. The lord of Radan asked an elder if he was the chief of the village and if there really was a mine in that dangerous forest, to which the elder replied affirmatively, introducing the man who knew the way to the mine, exclaiming that he would personally guide him to inspect it in the future. The elder praised the Lord of Raydan, and these comments pleased the arrogant lord, who then fixed his gaze on the silhouette of Wendy, a young woman. "It won't be very difficult to ensure that you never go hungry, but do you believe you can satisfy mine?" asked the Lord of Raydan, with hidden intentions. Wendy did not know why, but the Lord's gaze made her very uncomfortable. Other villagers discussed that the repugnant Lord was doing this again. In the past, some young women had been taken this way and were never seen again. They felt pity for Wendy. Later, Wendy met Randy in the forest and commented that this was a scarf she had recently woven, which made her warmer than the previous one. She revealed that the Lord would take her as his concubine soon, and that they could no longer see each other, asking her confused friend to take care of herself. Randy did not understand why her friend had to leave, nor did she understand the meaning of the word concubine. Wendy did not want to leave her father and Randy alone, but whenever outsiders came, many things changed, inevitably altering her village. Holding back tears and forcing a smile, Wendy declared that as long as Randy and her father were well, she would also be fine. For her part, Randy thought that the outsiders made her friend Wendy sad. On November 15th of the year 270 of the kingdom, the group sent by the Lord to inspect the mine were attacked and had to retreat. They said the culprit was the doppelganger of the mysterious forest, and Wendy was worried about Randy, as she had not seen him for several weeks. Unfortunately, her worries became reality. Randy, whom she met by chance, no longer resembled her. The girl wondered how many times her friend had to fight after taking on the appearance of the Lord's knight. Randy was agonizing. The doppelganger promised Wendy that he would be fine, that he would not let humans enter the forest again. Wendy could feel Randy's desire to protect her, but the possibility of losing him terrified her. It was reported that the docile doppelganger began to attack the outsiders after this incident, and Vander could not believe that he had been fighting for over 100 years just to protect that girl named Wendy. Grid remembered that the system mentioned that the Guardian's accessory set was made by the doppelganger of the mysterious forest and questioned if that was why. Although he wondered when he took on the appearance of Pagma, Wendy continued reporting that the medicinal herbs she collected had no effect on Randy. If another subjugation army came to the mine, Randy could truly die. It seems that even a wild beast can have a pure heart when it has something to protect, as hoped. "This mine is too much of a temptation for humans," exclaimed a voice that the girls recognized. It was Pagma, who could see that the doppelganger was very injured. He said he needed to treat his wounds. Although he had killed many humans, his actions came from a noble heart. Wendy asked him to stop, that he should not hit an injured person with a hammer. But, to Wendy's surprise, Randy's wounds healed quickly when touched by the hammer. It was like seeing magic. The reason the doppelganger could create a weapon with a material that composes his body is that, technically speaking, he can be considered made of metal. Grid deduced that Pagma used repair. Pagma repaired the doppelganger's body. Something like that was not impossible for Pagma, as he mastered all metals. Then Grid, Pagma's successor, could also be capable of doing something like that. With the creature healed, Pagma warned that the demons of the underworld would rise in this world with the help of the Church of Yatan, but humans were busy fighting among themselves, despite the imminent threat of monsters. He commented that there must be a balance in the world, but if the Eternal Kingdom uses the power of this mine to threaten the Empire, then an era of chaos will begin. Pagma granted the doppelganger permission to use a portion of his power so that he could protect that forest. He ordered him to watch carefully to protect his friend Wendy. She did not understand anything they were talking about, but Randy seemed to understand everything. The girl wondered if Randy had become smarter than her. Randy's appearance changed to that of the beautiful prince, and then he protected Wendy and the mine. In the year 271 of the kingdom, on August 2nd, the Lord subjugation groups came numerous times, but now Randy did not receive a single injury from these battles. Wendy thought it was a relief. However, Randy's warm eyes began to grow cold little by little. "Never return to the forest. Stay with your father from now on," Randy ordered his friend. Wendy did not understand the doppelganger's actions. Randy revealed that, with Pagma's appearance, he could easily kill humans and was afraid of hurting his friend with his hands. He mentioned that Wendy is human and he can never touch her with these hands. He is fine if he protects the mine, then she will be happy, he exclaimed with a smile on his face. That was the last time she saw Randy's smile. After that, Randy began to hide his face more and more, and Wendy felt guilty because her friend had become like this. Year 271 of the kingdom. December 10th. I heard from the villagers that my father was arrested when he went to sell leather in the village. I could not tell Randy because she is already suffering too much. Right now, my father is imprisoned in the Raydan castle. The person who ordered it was the Lord of Raydan. The latter explains that Wendy's father committed the crime of conspiring against him along with a doppelganger, but mentions that if Wendy becomes his concubine, he could free him. He explains that he could now execute Wendy's father with a single order, but describes himself as a merciful person. Wendy had no choice but to accept being his concubine to save her father. However, her father was never freed while Wendy was imprisoned in the castle. Her life became a deep and dark hell. The Lord of Raydan exclaims that, because of the beast blocking the mine, he has already lost hundreds of soldiers, and questions Wendy if she believes that becoming his concubine could compensate for all this. This is a mine that I must acquire, at all costs. I will not let you die until you tell me where this beast is hiding, threatened the Lord of Raydan. The story continues in the bamboo forest. A boy wonders if this will be the place that Madame Eli from the castle told him about. It is the first time he is in a forest like this, after living so long as a servant of the castle. The boy wonders if it will be there and remembers that he was tasked with taking this box to a place. It seems he has arrived at the location, but it appears that no one lives here. It is an old and forgotten house. The boy is sure that no one lives here. Going back to the past, Wendy wrote to her friend Randy in her diary, "I still remember the day we met, you who were surprised to see me and ran away, you who accepted to wear the scarf I knitted, you with that warm smile in the cold winter, you who hate to fight, but will inevitably have to do so. As long as the Lord wants this mine, I am sorry. I regret not being able to stop this, but just as you protected me, Randy, I will also protect you. I will protect that place where you can rest. I also loved seeing your smile." Grid stops reading and exclaims that this was the last page of Wendy's diary. The boys of the clan have no words, but Vander breaks down crying for poor Randy, who fought for over 100 years without realizing that Wendy was no longer alive. The clan assumes that he must not understand that the lifespan of humans and doppelgangers is different. He protected the mine for so long that he lost the sense of his own existence. Grid mentions that they could do nothing. In any case, they must simply see this as having helped Randy to rest. There is nothing more painful than fighting for something and not knowing if your effort will be worth it, revealed Grid, knowing this feeling well. The boys feel that Grid said these words from his heart. It is then that a window informs that Grid learned a little more about the person named Pagma. You have a bond with Pagma. The growth rate of your skills will increase. You discovered the story of the doppelganger of the mysterious forest. The doppelganger of the mysterious forest that you defeated is now different from the past. Its intelligence, physical abilities, and most of its memories have degraded, but if you call it Randy, it will rejoice and follow you. Grid thinks that he cannot abandon the creature after hearing its tragic story and orders to recover the doppelganger, after finishing what they came to do. Thacker asks if they will return to Rayen, but Grid exclaims that they will return with Randy. After everything that happened, he deserves to have new friends, declared the protagonist. If you don't want to miss the upcoming releases, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This is very important to us. I look forward to seeing you in the next Nerd Recap. For days after the exploration expedition to the mine, they shout in the castle that the Lord has returned. Rabbit comments that they were delayed more than expected. Administratively speaking, a brief delay in scheduled activities causes significant losses. Grid responds that he was delayed more because he was killing all the monsters he saw as part of his training, but he will be more careful in the future. He then confirms to Rabbit that, as he suspected, it turned out to be a yellow mithril mine, and they succeeded in conquering it. Rabbit thinks that now they have the monopoly on the legendary yellow mithril mine, which even the Empire does not have. They will be able to have an unparalleled position in terms of alchemy. He decides to discuss with Grid the amount of money they need to invest to develop the mine for alchemy, but Grid asks Rabbit to take care of that along with the rest of the clan members, as those guys know a lot about these things. Rabbit is excited because the protagonist's ability to divide and assign responsibilities is surprising, being the perfect attitude for someone who wishes to accumulate a great fortune. Then, Grid notices that someone has arrived and greets Euphemina, whom he hasn't seen in a long time. Euphemina heard that they were looking for her and asks if they need her to take care of something. Grid praises her for helping so much in the blacksmith shop, but Euphemina corrects him, saying that she is now helping with the construction of the outer wall. Grid gives Euphemina permission to rest and thanks the girl for working tirelessly. It was thanks to her that Raydan was able to recover so quickly. These words embarrass young Euphemina, who did not expect so many compliments. Grid seizes the moment and proposes to the girl that they go on vacation to the Mermaid Kingdom, and also asks her to bring back some tears from the King of the Water Clan, which serve to add magic to items. Euphemina curses the bastard for his true intentions and feels that it won't be a vacation. Grid exclaims that he couldn't ask for a favor for free and offers the gift as compensation. Euphemina is surprised to see that it is a unique class zip-up hoodie, which serves as an invisibility cloak. The incredulous girl is moved to see that she will have an item like the one the legendary Master Kruger made 200 years ago. She exclaims that she will get those tears immediately. Grid wishes her a good trip and emphasizes that helping in the growth of her comrades is also her responsibility. He then heads to the blacksmith shop to take care of that. A window informs that Grid extracted from the doppelganger of the mysterious forest from his pet inventory. The protagonist cannot believe that something so powerful has become this. He remembers that the diary said that Pakma repaired it, but the protagonist is completely unaware of the anatomy of the doppelganger. Still, he is Pakma's successor. Grid is confident that he will be able to find a way to repair it, as he needs to do so if he wants to be closer to Pakma's level. Grid decides to start by constantly hitting it with his hammer until something occurs to him, then activates the legendary blacksmith repair at level 3 and will let it guide him. A week later, we see the guys outside the blacksmith shop, surprised because the protagonist spends time in the blacksmith shop. Lowell exclaims that now Grid has fewer skills to serve as lord, due to the stabilization of the city. Then the continuous sound of his hammer can only mean one thing. By hitting the doppelganger, Grid increases his dexterity by 5 points and his perseverance by 3 points. Grid is focused on achieving great feats, and his legendary blacksmith repair rises to level 4. After a long day of work, Grid sighs exhausted, wondering how many days it took to finish. The protagonist had to use the enhancing stones that the other members obtained for him. Grid wanted to achieve better results, as he spent many stones, but he assumes it was worth it. He improved the great sword of the doppelganger and its boots by 8 points. Then he thinks that the best gain of all was another. Grid managed to repair the doppelganger, whose name has not yet been established. He is level 1 and is confused. He has the ability to copy at master level, being able to perfectly copy the appearance of a target with a lower level than his. The statistics will be copied at 80% and some skills will be copied randomly. He can also completely copy the appearance of a target at the same level as him, but in this case, the statistics will be copied at 50% and some skills will be copied randomly. He can also perfectly copy the appearance of a higher level target, in which case the statistics will be copied at 20% and only some skills will be copied randomly. Lastly, he can perfectly copy the appearance of his owner, with the statistics copied at 20% and some previously selected skills. The creature also has the ability of level 1 language capacity, which grants it the linguistic ability of a level 1 child. It also possesses the ability of semi-immortality, which is passive. Somewhere in the doppelganger's body is a core of vital energy. The doppelganger will not die unless that core is completely destroyed. The protagonist finds this incredible, as its base statistics are lower than No's, but its copying ability is exceptional. A clone that can copy 30% of its statistics allows it to do many things with that ability. Then, the doppelganger asks about its own identity. Who am I? Who are you? The confused creature asked. The protagonist laments that the doppelganger has lost all its memories due to its deteriorated state. Grid decides to help him and tells the doppelganger that his name is Randy. He also introduces himself as Grid, his new friend. The word friend seems to make the doppelganger react, who has a vague but calm memory of his first friend. Randy repeats the word friend as he begins to take shape, transforming into his first friend. He exclaims that Randy is a good name and that friends are good. The protagonist is surprised by the appearance that Wendy had and is happy that the doppelganger likes his name. Until your sad memories can be replaced by joyful ones, I will be with you, thought Grid, petting the creature's head. Meanwhile, in the city, the guild members discuss the missions that will keep them busy in the coming months. Vander comments that he has been assigned to the mission of reconnecting the path through the mountains and exterminating all the monsters there. He is upset because there must be about 10 nests of giant worms around and it will take a long time. Regis, on the other hand, is excited because he has to investigate a dungeon of boss monsters in the west. Pond takes the opportunity to ask Lowell if Grid is starting his journey today. The strategist responds affirmatively and explains that the protagonist will visit the fields around the castle and will leave after that. The protagonist also told Lowell to inform him of all the results of the scheduled activities. Meanwhile, in the fields, We see the plants shining with vitality when someone calls the farmer Piero. It is Grid, and from his clothing, Piero asks if he is going to start a new journey. The protagonist exclaims that he has been working on something and is eager to test it, mentioning that the city is safe and therefore it is a good time for that. This catches the attention of the swordsman, Grid, who proposes to be his agent of revenge, as he believes he is in a position to do so. Grid has the mission to punish the true traitor of the Red Knights, rank SS, Asmul, who dared to secretly meet with the Empress and was caught by Piero. Piero and his men were incriminated and labeled as traitors. Due to this he lost his men and had to flee. Now, Piero lives as a fugitive and has no intention of forgiving Asmul. However, it is impossible for Piero to carry out his revenge alone, because his face is very well known in the Empire. Piero asked Grid to be his agent of revenge. The mission conditions are to kill Asmul, the former vice-captain of the Red Knights. The reward for the mission is that the affinity with Piero will reach its maximum, but if he fails, he will lose 6 levels. Piero can feel that the protagonist is serious. Grid asks his friend not to make that face, and Piero explains that he was quite surprised. He remembers that he asked Grid, but did not expect the protagonist to want to do this at this moment. The protagonist checks that the difficulty has increased and the reward has changed, perhaps because Piero is more emotionally stable. The reward is now the maximum affinity with Piero, so if he succeeds, he might be able to turn him into his subordinate. Piero warns Grid that the strength of the Empire is overwhelming, getting close to Asmul will be difficult, and reminds the protagonist that his two-sword style is still very deficient, so he should not trust too much. Still, he trusts that Grid can do this and leaves this matter in his hands, exclaiming that he will prepare a great feast for his return. It will take me 20 days to reach Titan, the capital of the Empire. So, I will take this time to train during the trip, exclaimed Grid, asking him to trust that he will return victorious. Finally, Grid began his journey towards the Empire, hoping that the Empire would not disappoint him. Elsewhere in Satisfy, some guys discuss whether that is the Yule tribe. They cannot believe they have been hiding in this place. Over a cliff, the boy asks his companion, Kiki, how many enemies she can detect with her Hawkeye's ability. Here we are introduced to a player named Kiki, with the class of Sharpshooter. She is one of the 10 rookies and the second in command of the White Wolf Guild. The girl replies that there are about 1050 people, and half of them are women and children. Here we are introduced to the identity of the other boy, Veridin, a level 281 necromancer, one of the 10 rookies and master of the White Wolf Guild. He is also a baron of the Saharan Empire. The latter exclaims that they will not need a strategy, he will just charge straight at them. Kiki mentions that they are just a tribe hiding after the Empire stole their lands. She questions whether they really need to exterminate them all, thinking that this is too much. Veridin, upset, states that Count Sibra ordered the complete extermination of the immigrants, mentioning that if they cannot defend themselves against 24 people, then they will not be able to defend themselves against anyone else. The members will receive 12 contribution points to the Empire for each member of the Yule tribe they execute. Furthermore, he expresses that it took them a week to find their hideout, claiming that they are just resources they need to ascend to the title of Viscount. He says they are not human, just NPCs, in a grim tone. He then orders the White Wolf Guild to finish them all off. The people of the Yule tribe notice the invasion of the Imperial soldiers and alert the tribe to evacuate. The guild players devastate the tribe, shouting that it is so much fun to gain contribution points this way, and mercilessly finish off a mother who was trying to protect her child. Kiki finds the situation very sad, but notices something and, without warning, several guild members are instantly massacred. Veridin cannot believe that a single attack caused so much damage, thinking that the guild members on this mission are above level 200, and there shouldn't be any NPC capable of facing them. He reasons that it must be a player and orders Kiki to shoot. The girl is aware of the situation and shoots mercilessly. The player's precise shot crosses the battlefield in an instant and hits the target. That surprised me, Grid's voice is heard as he drops his hat, not expecting there to be a hidden shooter. We see a mission to rescue the Yule tribe. The Yule tribe has been stripped of their lands by the Empire. The mission's condition is to repel the invaders. The reward will be achieving maximum affinity with the tribe. If they fail to defend, the tribe will be extinct. The protagonist cannot believe he received a hidden mission while strolling through this village. It seems he really has luck for these things. Don't they think that massacring a defenseless village like this is too much? Do they think it's right to act this way just because they belong to a powerful nation? The protagonist questions, exclaiming that it is lamentable that in this place they exterminate ordinary citizens, while in his city they are scarce. On the other hand, Veridin wonders who his opponent will be. "I should save them and then guide them to my city," Grid exclaimed, deciding to return to being the apostle of justice. At this moment, we can also see that Pabranayam managed to stop the shooter's bullet. While all this happens, at the entrance of Raydan, another player comments that his inventory is full and is about to exceed the weight limit because he has been hunting for 10 consecutive days. He needs to sell some items and wonders why Raydan is the only city in this area. Yes, it has changed a lot. Just 8 months ago, this was a desert full of monsters, commented a player dressed in white. If I'm not mistaken, I remember that the new Lord of Raydan was a player named Grid. It seems he is much more competent than Cybele, said Crayagel, the first place in the unified ranking. Crayagel is impressed with these fields of cultivation in the middle of the desert, all in good condition, and did not know that something like this was possible. Then, he hears a voice behind him. "Ever since I agreed to accompany the Duke, I haven't stopped meeting amazing people," exclaimed the excited Piero, asking for the identity of the outsider. Let's remember that in the previous chapter, Grid appeared to save a tribe from the attack of the White Wolf Guild. The members of the White Wolf Guild insult the protagonist for being meddlesome. Veridin, in turn, tries to remember where he saw those golden blades that move on their own. The members of White Wolf attack the protagonist, launching several skills against him, but they seem to be useless against Grid. At the same time, the windows inform that the target resisted. "Is that all? For you who are at level 200, it must be hard to endure my presence, since my dignity is 1,500 points, exclaimed Grid. Then, a window informs the guys that they have lost their fighting spirit in the face of an immeasurable existence. The players cannot move and feel their bodies trembling. Veridin is impressed because the protagonist is capable of causing a state effect similar to stunning just with his gaze, which leads him to intuit that the protagonist is a player with a powerful hidden class. Then, Grid swings his great sword and gives the guys two options, a quick death or a slow death. He then uses his Transcendence Link skill and instantly finishes off several members of the White Wolf Guild. The shooter also cannot do anything in the face of the imminent attack directed at her, and a few seconds later, a window informs Veridin that member Kiki has also died. The guild master is surprised because the protagonist was able to defeat Kiki, one of the 10 rookies and the second in command of the White Wolf Guild, with a single attack. He then reasons that the guy must be the famous player Grid, whom he has heard so much about. Raising his staff, he cannot believe that an insignificant duke of the lamentable Eternal Kingdom dares to attack his guild and begins to move the bodies of his companions. Apparently, he used his necromancer skill and will show Grid the difference between the Empire and the Eternal Kingdom. The protagonist reasons that the player he is facing is a necromancer, as he was able to revive the corpses around him, turning them into his soldiers. These last ones return to use their skills against Grid. The protagonist calculates that it is not much damage, but it will accumulate over time. He did not expect to find such an opponent on his journey, so he decides to entrust this to his new friend. Immediately we see how the launched skills are gathered all in one point. Veridin does not understand what is happening and thinks that the skills are being absorbed. But then we see that these skills are redirected by Pagma's fencing rotation skill, causing the skills to return and impact their respective owners. Veridin again perceives Grid's silhouette amidst the chaos, trying to take his back, exclaiming that surprise attacks will not work against him. Although he praises Grid's speed, he is unexpectedly hit by a vertical cut from the front. This attack leaves the guild master confused, who believed he had seen the protagonist behind him, but received the attack from the front. "Seeing your face sweat with fear is priceless. I expected nothing from the Empire," exclaimed Grid in a mocking tone. Veridin, in turn, cannot believe that the protagonist also has a clone. He remembers that a tangible clone is a skill available only to an assassin of level 300 or higher, so seeing this ability, Veridin deduces that Grid could be that mysterious assassin said to have even been able to assassinate the number 1 in the ranking, Krogel. He still remembers that the number 1 assassin has not revealed his face yet, and that person is Faker, not Grid. Moreover, assassins do not use a great sword. The protagonist, for his part, apologizes to Randy for making him fight, but the doppelganger asks his dear friend not to worry. The necromancer begins to assess that the clone made him lose 20% of his life with one attack. He is a necromancer with low defense, so if he lost so little life, he deduces that the real body should not be very strong. Grid also calculates that Randy's attack power is only 30% of what he has, But still, his attack should have caused more damage. Randy must have reduced the power of his attack to gauge the enemy's strength. Without a doubt, his combat instincts, after 100 years of experience, are remarkable. The necromancer mentions that he is surprised because Grid was able to use a high-level clone and at the same time a great sword. But this is only possible for the protagonist. For Veridin, however, it does not matter who he is, since if we talk about numbers, he has many in his favor. This act greatly irritates Grid, who cannot believe that the guy has used the bodies of the tribe as puppets. Randy is ready to protect his friend, but Grid asks him to wait a moment, explaining that they will only kill those who are armed. They cannot allow the tribe members to suffer more than they already have. Grid knew that such classes existed, but he did not know that their users were so repugnant. He decides that, to not see more of these repugnant scenarios, he will eliminate bastards like this. Grid cannot forgive people who treat NPCs as if they were toys. After this, he launches into the attack alongside Randy. The doppelganger makes use of Pagma's fencing, while Grid continues advancing. Randy finishes off several enemies in an instant, and the protagonist jumps directly at Veridin. The player calls the protagonist naive for believing that necromancers are weak in close combat, exclaiming that it was worth completing the S+ grade mission a few months ago and pulls a Dantalian bone from his inventory. Grid does not know what is about to happen, but is immediately impacted by a powerful blow that he barely manages to block with his sword. Grid retreats from the impact and reasons that if he had not blocked with his sword, his body would be in pieces. A creature takes a big step on the ground and Veridin reveals that it has not been long since he acquired it, so it is still incomplete. With the Dantalian bone as a medium, the 25th demon Dantalian awakened as an undead from his slumber. The necromancer exclaims that this is more than enough to turn Grid to dust. The demon Dantalian launches his offensive against Grid. The protagonist is impressed because they are just direct blows, but each blow causes a massive shockwave. It does not give him time to retreat. Pure physical damage is destroying his body. He then tries to protect himself with his sword from the demon's attacks. As if he is dominated, he will be completely destroyed by this immense destructive power. Veridin, in turn, orders Dantalian to use his ace in the hole, the brutal roar. Grid tried to hide his identity as much as he could during his journey up to this point, but it seems they will discover him as soon as he entered the Empire. Dantalian uses his powerful ultimate against Grid, causing a great explosion. The necromancer begins to celebrate his victory, mocking Grid for being too confident. "Isn't it you who is confident, just because you have an incomplete piece of bone?" asked Grid's voice to Veridin, who is incredulous because the protagonist managed to survive. The protagonist reveals that he was confident because he thought he could handle this while keeping a low profile and now seems to be equipped with all his items. The necromancer begins to worry and orders Dantalian to completely destroy Grid. The protagonist begins to perform a sword dance and reveals that he has already faced a great demon, so a piece of bone is not a challenge for him. Finishing his sword dance, he mentions that the flames of Hell Gao were much more terrifying. After this, he uses his pinnacle of Pagma's fencing skill. Meanwhile, in Raydan, Piero asks for the identity of the outsider Kraugel. He introduces himself as an ordinary adventurer, promises that he is not a strange person, and asks the farmer not to worry. Internally, he does not understand why a farmer would speak to him so suddenly, deducing that he must be alert, as it is difficult for outsiders to reach this place. Although he thinks it should be impossible for him to awaken the concern of an NPC, since his reputation is very high and he is the only one who can use the reputation shop. Out of nowhere, Piero exclaims that the steps the boy is taking are not the steps of an ordinary adventurer. Kraugel stands guard upon noticing that the NPC recognized the white light step skill of his white swordsman class. He questions who the hell this farmer is, tries to explain that it is a little trick he learned after walking a lot, and expresses that the only strange one there is the farmer, since he was able to recognize his steps. He decides to ask directly for his identity. Piero reasons that, to become the Sword Saint, he has been waiting for strong people like this boy and is ready to introduce himself. But then someone calls Mr. Piero to inform him that the food is ready. Piero asks the boys to eat first, as he is in the middle of a conversation. Piero tries to introduce himself again to the young man, but then he is called by another person who reminds him that Mr. Rabbit asked him to fetch more water sources. Piero begins to lose his patience and exclaims that if it is not a matter of life or death, do not bother him. Kraugel, in turn, deduces that Piero is a geologist and this must be the reason why he has such sharp vision. He explains that he just wants to visit the general store to continue his journey and bids farewell to Piero, but immediately turns around upon sensing a great presence, then jumps at great speed, managing to dodge a blow from the farmer. He lands on the ground with great agility and questions the NPC what kind of rudeness this is. Just as Piero suspected, the young man has very good footwork, exclaiming that it will be complicated to explain everything and will get straight to the point. First, he apologizes for attacking him this way. Meanwhile, in Grid's confrontation, the pinnacle attack pierces the demon and goes straight for Veridin. The great cut of the sword directly impacts the necromancer, finishing him off with a single blow. Then, Piero's voice is heard explaining that the person training with him is traveling and will not return for a while. He comments that the young Kraugel seems to be a good substitute and cannot let this opportunity pass. He exclaims that he also has things to do and will not allow him to enter Raydan unless he defeats him. Kraugel takes a step back and prepares for an imminent confrontation. He thinks that if it weren't for his sharp senses and white light steps, he wouldn't have been able to dodge that sudden attack. Then, Kraugel reacts in time and dodges another blow from Piero with the hoe. The farmer manages to reach Kraugel's great speed and matches the number 1 ranker. He notices that the farmer's weapon is strengthened with ki and cannot believe he was forced to draw his sword against a farming tool. Skillfully, he blocks Piero's continuous strikes. Here it is shown that Kraugel's sword is the White Fang, the favorite weapon of one of the 33 great demons, Drazian, who lost its true form after being defeated by Myler, the Sword Saint. Piero exclaims that it is hard to believe that the young man was able to block his hoe so easily. He is definitely not an ordinary adventurer. Kraugel responds that this is an insolence against someone who wanted to pass peacefully through the city and threatens the farmer, saying he will regret it. Piero does not believe the same, and the white swordsman is surprised because his sword was immobilized. He cannot allow this and frees himself from Piero's grip, but his attack is dodged by the farmer. Piero is surprised because the young man attacked immediately after freeing himself from the grip, but he saw that the young man wanted to attack his neck and left leg at the same time in a single movement, which is not very good. Piero creates distance with Kraugel by making a wide swing with his hoe, which the ranker manages to dodge. Piero reveals his desire to become the Sword Saint and requests a formal duel against the young man. Kraugel also wants to become the Sword Saint. He was able to obtain the title of candidate for Sword Saint thanks to his meticulous and difficult training, but he could not reach the 5th stage and is stagnated at the 3rd stage. He shouts to Piero that the position of Sword Saint can only be obtained with great effort and total dedication. It is not something that a simple farmer like Piero should mention so shamelessly. After that, he launches an attack with his meteor sword skill, which generates a wave of ki that descends like a meteor. Piero is moved by the young man's ability to channel a skill in the air and receives the impact of the skill with his hoe, causing a great explosion. Piero's whole body is trembling with emotion, as it has been a long time since the swordsman felt such an intense sensation. Kraugel is impressed because the swordsman did not use any skill to stop his attack, blocking his meteor sword with a simple farming tool, preparing a counterattack. He confirms once again that the guy is not an ordinary farmer, but Piero dodges Kraugel's attack while taking his back at great speed. The young man calculates that the hardest boss he has faced so far is the great demon Drazian, but this farmer is at the same level, blocking Piero's attack. He deduces that he must be some kind of hermit master and curses his luck for encountering him. Piero also calculates that the young man is stronger than any opponent he has faced so far, shouting that he has no doubts and laughingly exclaims that the young man will help him become the Sword Saint. But then, Kraugel manages to land a move that knocks Piero's hat off. The cut hits Piero's forehead, and he is impressed because the young man was able to act so quickly, despite changing the hand that wielded the sword. A genius who can quickly decipher the pattern of attacks and the abilities of his opponent, someone with astonishing reaction speed and precise movements. The God of Control or the Emperor of Counterattack. He had many nicknames, but Kraugel had a unique nickname, something that only applied to him: Kugel, the sky above the sky. The white swordsman mentions that fencing with farming equipment is very fierce, but it is far from the fencing of the Sword Saint. Piero understands that the young man was able to decipher and counterattack the Empire's fencing techniques in a short period of time. Then, he heads to a scarecrow where he kept his sword and exclaims that he will have to fight seriously. After all, he was the one who requested a duel. Drawing his sword, he exclaims that he is still far from being the Sword Saint, but asks Kraugel for help and decides to use his unparalleled fencing skill. Kraugel's senses perceive that the farmer will now fight seriously. Then, Piero attacks without warning and delivers a series of thrusts against Kraugel. The ranker feels that the thrusts are fast. He has perfected the basics to such an extent that Kraugel still cannot comprehend them. Piero praises Kraugel's excellent sword knowledge and approaches to close the distance. Kraugel retreats using his white light steps to try to mitigate the incoming attack. Piero activates the first style of his unparalleled fencing and rises above the young man. Kraugel cannot move due to Piero's powerful ki and will not be able to avoid the attack, so he decides to face it directly and uses his storm sword skill. Both swordsmen impact their attacks, causing a great explosion. The other farmers watch the confrontation and can see that Lord Piero is very violent today. Although it is the first time they see someone press Lord Piero so much, one of the workers sees a monster bird and is worried that it will eat the wheat crops. However, his companion tells him not to worry. Then, the unfortunate monster is hit by an electric blow and falls immediately to the ground. Someone exclaims that the crops have been ruined again and does not understand why Lord Piero chooses to fight in the fields he worked on. The farmers remember that Lord Piero said that this way he would have more work to do as training, but they scold the boy, as he also just destroyed another crop. The young Brand exclaims that the farmers must be strong, leaving the farmers speechless. On one hand, they have a fight that is completely destroying a field, and on the other hand, they have the corpse of a monster, and yet Raydan is in a great period of peace. Piero reveals that no one had survived his first style of unparalleled fencing, but the young man came out unscathed from his attack. Kraugel reasons that he used his level 7 advanced sword mastery passive skill, the key sword, and the effects of his candidate for sword saint title to strengthen himself. Piero, in turn, notes that there are still remnants of ki from the storm sword skill that the young man used. If he had all his power, he could deal with the remnants in an instant. He also assumes that if his sword were in good condition, it would improve his performance. Piero had never given importance to his equipment, but this opponent helped him understand its importance. Kraugel launches a skill while being irritated by the relaxed expression Piero had on his face throughout the confrontation. Then, he uses his Earth Ascension skill, catching Piero by surprise. The NPC is surprised by the young man's ability to change his horizontal attack to an upward attack. But then he begins to use his unparalleled fencing, making use of the 5th style of fencing and launching several attacks that undo the young man's skill. The young man realizes that the farmer used a powerful intangible ki attack again, but this time there are 9, and he will not be able to block them all. Then, Kraugel covers himself to try to minimize the damage, but a window informs him of the great damage he just received. Piero, in turn, is surprised by the young man's decision not to dodge them. Kraugel confirms that Lord Piero's attack power is greater than he expected. His powerful ki makes Kraugel's legendary armor useless. But now that Piero has cut his flesh, the rancor is willing to cut the farmer's bones, reasoning that the skill he is about to use only shows its true power under the moonlight, but the rancor has no other option and will use it under the sunlight. Launching his skill, he is not willing to throw away all the effort he has put in so far. The feet of the white swordsman begin to shine as he walks. Piero remembers that these were the foot movements the young man was using when he arrived in Raydan. Then, Kraugel uses his rising moon sword skill, after which he emits a bright ray of light from his sword. Piero is dazzled by the light and wonders if the young man has disappeared. But then Kraugel appears behind him. He moves at great speed, and Piero cannot see him under the sunlight. As the young man moves, Piero deduces that he must be using light refraction, confirming that the young man is at the level of the most powerful, but if he trusts his eyes, he can do it. Then, out of nowhere, Kraugel disappears from Piero's sight instantly, leaving the swordsman shocked, confirming that he cannot follow his movements. He thinks this is dangerous and will have to focus on defense and prepare for anything. The expert sword lost its shine while resting in its sheath, but just as a sword's name does not change just because it rusted, its strength remained unmatched. However, the one who was unmatched began to sweat cold. After a long time, Kraugel managed to pierce Piero from behind. That person who was able to dominate the strongest swordsman on the continent without fear in his heart was Kraugel, the swordsman who stood out among more than 2 billion players. The combat continued after Piero received proof of the white swordsman's skill. Piero cannot believe that there is a person like him. He is on a completely different level. It may have been just for a moment, but the NPC could not follow his movements or detect his presence. Piero lost the calm expression on his face and replaced it with one of concern. Kraugel, in turn, confirms that, as he expected, the power of the skill is very deficient under the sun. Even now that he managed to land a full hit, it only inflicted 30% of his normal attack power. He is surprised because Piero was able to quickly defend against his key attack. For a moment, he thought he had been able to change the course of the fight. After that attack, the farmer was able to constantly deflect the trajectory of his sword, and Kraugel could not swing his sword as he wanted. He never imagined that a simple farmer could be so powerful. He has no more options and must admit that Piero's fencing is superior to his. But then he decisively blocks an attack from Piero and exclaims that the battle is not over yet. But Piero decides to end it by activating the third style of his unparalleled fencing, causing an explosion of ki that frightens Kraugel. Piero manages to break through Kraugel's defense and lands a powerful blow with his sword, causing a lot of damage to the white swordsman, and a window informs that he received 15,800 damage. Kraugel lost half of his life to a rusty sword and confirms that the farmer is a monster. Kraugel is left with only half of his mana and cannot afford to prolong this. Then, he assumes a combat position, and his sword begins to shine again. Piero can feel that the young man is gathering an immense amount of energy in his sword. Then, Kraugel takes his weapon and uses the white light sword skill, a brilliant ray of light projected from the player's sword completely dazzling Piero. The light completely blocks the swordsman's vision. It is then that Kraugel launches himself to end the combat. Piero dodges the blow, despite having lost his senses. He is impressed by the great number of trump cards the young man has. He feels he must push away his fears before he dies. Then, Piero releases a great amount of energy, again using his unparalleled fencing, this time using the fourth style and catching the white swordsman by surprise. Kraugel does not understand what is happening, but his sword is being attracted by a kind of magnetic ki force. He cannot escape this just with strength, and Kraugel will not be able to resist. Moreover, he has already used almost all the mana he had left. Even so, he grips his sword tightly, unwilling to let Piero snatch it away. He uses his last strength to use the Sky Tear skill and releases immense power. Both swordsmen collide their swords and unleash overwhelming energy. Then, a window informs that the durability of the White Fang sword decreased by 213 points. This surprises Kraugel, as the durability of the sword decreased by 60%, and yet Piero did not back down even a little. If he uses his super sensitivity and the sweet candy from the reputation shop, he might have a chance. The sweet candy temporarily increases all stats by 30%. The combat power will be doubled. It is an exclusive item from the reputation shop. However, Kraugel reminds that, besides the great demons that were weakened after being defeated by Myler, there are still 29 great demons and dragons left. He questions whether he should really use his sword and such an expensive item against a mere farmer. Deciding to accept defeat, Kraugel's sword flies through the skies, and the player admits his defeat. He never imagined losing to a farmer, especially when he came just to clear his inventory. Piero sheathes his sword, exclaiming that it was a great fight. Kraugel asks him to finish the combat by killing him, but Piero refuses, explaining that he has no reason to do so. The player questions the use of killing intent during the fight, and Piero apologizes, explaining that it was necessary for the young man to fight seriously against him. Kraugel is curious about the person that Duke Grid is to send someone like Piero to the fields. Piero reveals that he is not a subordinate of Duke Grid and explains that his work as a farmer is part of his training, and finding water sources is just a courtesy to the Duke. He proposes to Kraugel that he help him, as he has the impression that the young man can become stronger quickly if he trains with him. Kraugel confirms that he wants to become stronger, but he does not believe that this is the right way to do it. Piero exclaims that they will work in the fields in the morning and train in the afternoon, ensuring that the young man will become stronger and proposing to do so for a month. A window shows the hidden mission of fun and exciting training living with the farmers of Raydan. The mission conditions are to live with Piero for a month. Kraugel must strictly follow his work routine and, as a reward, will obtain the farming skill and advance to the next stage of Sword Saint Candidate. This mission leaves the young prodigy speechless, as he cannot believe that he will advance to the fourth stage of Sword Saint Candidate. In the end, finding this farmer was not so bad, and Kraugel thinks that a month is a short time to find an opportunity to surpass his limits, deciding to accept the hidden mission. On that day, the number 1 ranker became a farmer of Raydan. Meanwhile, the protagonist realizes that he did not give much importance to this mission, just because it was a qualification A, but it turned out to be more difficult than he expected. It took only 25 people for his health and stamina to decrease by 15% because of a guy named Veridin. The protagonist had to fight against many corpses, and his individual combat power was on par with the members of the Overgeared clan. It was the first time the protagonist fought against a necromancer, and he believes that including some anti-undead item in the Guardian's accessory set is not a bad idea. The Guardian's accessory set turned out to be more useful than the protagonist imagined, as his untamed statistic now exceeds 1,000 points, and he only recently noticed its effect. However, what surprised the protagonist the most was Randy's performance, and he thanks the doppelganger for protecting him. Even though he can only copy 30% of his stats, he was able to fight against users of level 200 approximately. The protagonist promises Randy that he will try not to involve him too much in the upcoming battles, but the doppelganger exclaims that he likes to protect his friend, as the compliments make him happy. The moment is interrupted by No, who appears shouting that he also wants to fight. Grid notices that No is already at level 143, his horn is bigger, and he is acquiring a more demonic appearance. The protagonist heard that if a player increases their demonic power by killing other players, it is possible that they can enter hell. The protagonist tries to praise No, saying that he had no reason to make his precious secret weapon face insignificant bugs, and this comment cheers the cat up. Randy, for his part, wants to play with No. It is then that someone from the tribe catches Grid's attention, calling him a hero and introducing himself as the village chief. He wants to thank the protagonist for saving the tribe, but he does not know how to repay him. A window informs that the mission to rescue the tribe has been completed and the protagonist's affinity with the tribe has reached its maximum. This seems like an excellent achievement for Grid. The protagonist decides to use the Sword of the Great Lord to see if there are talented people among the tribe members. Immediately, windows appear about each tribe member, and the protagonist is surprised because the NPCs have an average of 100 intelligence points, but most of the tribe members have around 300. If the protagonist acts correctly, it is possible that he can recruit powerful mages among them. However, something catches Grid's attention. An 11-year-old girl named Warren, who has the title of the last member of the royal family of the Ull tribe and is at level 7. The girl's stats are very low, and she still has no skills, but the growth of her intelligence stat can reach up to 1890 points. Grid is surprised that the girl is of royal blood and has exceptional intelligence potential. Now, the protagonist cannot help her increase that stat, but if he finds some way, the girl will be of great use. Grid mentions that he heard that Count Sibra is the lord of these lands and asks the villagers if they think he will try to attack them again, a thought that is confirmed by the tribe chief. Grid introduces himself as Duke and Lord of Raydan, which is part of the Eternal Kingdom, and makes a proposal to the villagers. How about becoming citizens of Raydan? The village chief argues that Grid is a duke foreign to the Empire and does not want to trouble him, as the Eternal Kingdom would not allow it, so as not to irritate the Empire. Grid proposes to do this in secret, explaining that Raydan is his duchy and even the royal family cannot intervene directly. He promises the citizens that they will not be discriminated against in Raydan. These words move the tribe, who do not know how they will be able to repay the duke's kindness. Grid asks Lowell to send someone to guide 930 people from the Empire to Raydan. The strategist responds that it is a large number of people and he can only think of one person for this job. Grid believes he knows who the strategist is referring to, but asks him to send someone more sociable. The strategist explains that everyone is very busy in Raydan, and he is the only person among the knights who can summon where Grid is and can help with this matter. The protagonist looks at his list of knights and cannot believe that everyone is busy. Although Lowell exclaims that it is lucky that the only available person is also the perfect person for this task. Then, Grid uses his ability to summon knights to call Faker. Lowell mentions that his ability to set traps and quickly analyze the shadow situation is perfect for this. Grid finds it strange that Faker is only wearing leather armor and asks about the other one. Faker explains that he is more accustomed to this one and that if he wears the other, he might get distracted and lower his guard. The protagonist asks his knight to guide these people to Raydan, explaining that it will be a long journey, but he trusts Faker. The assassin accepts the proposal but asks what Grid will do. The protagonist replies that Lowell asked him to obtain an item during this trip and that he must also visit the count who allowed this to happen. "I must see with my own eyes what gives them the right to treat people this way," exclaimed the protagonist, willing to discover the greatness of this place called the Empire. It is then that we turn to the White Wolf clan, where they discuss that not only did they fail in their mission, but the entire clan was defeated by a single individual. The clan members apologize to Veradin and assume that if they had resisted a little longer, they might have won. The clan master explains that the outcome was inevitable. Contrary to what the rumors say, Grid's control was excellent, which is why, even including Kraugel in the comparison, Grid is skilled enough to compete for the title of strongest. Kiki, for her part, exclaims that the way a Duke of the Eternal Kingdom strolls through the territory of the Empire is a provocation. She assumes that if they report this to Count Sibra, he probably would not be able to return home safe and sound. Then, Kiki asks the clan master why they did not report it. Veridin mentions that it has been a while since an objective caught his attention, and he wants to observe his movements a little longer. He tells his companions not to worry, as Grid will inevitably come face to face with Count Sibra. He comments that no one enters someone else's house without a purpose in mind. Then we return to Grid, who is in front of Count Sibra's castle, reasoning that he only needs to obtain one thing from this place. He remembers that his bad reputation was raised by killing those players and that they almost did not let him enter the city. The protagonist took 4 days of hunting to reduce his bad reputation and be able to enter the city without problems. He assumes that at least he took advantage of all that time to train his dual sword style and level up Randy and No. But something catches his attention. The messenger bird that Irene sends weekly to Grid. The protagonist is surprised because a week has already passed since the last time. He thinks he should read this letter later, as at this moment he needs to complete the mission that is before his eyes. Grid stops in front of the castle entrance, and some soldiers ask for his identity. The soldiers can feel the great presence of the protagonist and ask for his purpose. Grid replies that he came to exterminate the Ripper, and the windows show that his dignity is 1,522 points, while his reputation exceeds 25,000 points. The soldiers are surprised because the young man is going alone and without help after the Ripper. They allow him to enter and will take him to the Count's presence. The protagonist followed Lowell's advice and came to this place instead of going directly to the capital of the Titan Empire. He remembers that the strategist mentioned that in the basement of Count Sibra's castle is the Ripper, a monster that is half man, half demon, and Grid remembers that he must obtain an ocular part from the Ripper, at all costs, as this item has the potential to change the course of a battle. The protagonist decides that he first needs to find out what kind of people the Count and the Stripper are. The soldiers present themselves before the Count and inform him that there is a candidate to participate in the incursion against the Stripper. The Count replies that they have arrived at a bad time, as he was about to extract a good scream from this subject. Here we are shown the identity of Count Sibra. Grid cannot believe that the man enjoys torturing dying people. He can deduce that the Count has no remorse for what he did to the tribe. The Count is surprised, as he perceives in the protagonist an elegance and dignity comparable to that of the imperial family, but thinks it is impossible for someone from the imperial family to come to a place like this just to kill a monster. The Count asks Grid not to pay attention to the situation, explaining that he was merely punishing this man for spilling water on his favorite alcohol bottle. He comments that the damned peasants do not know how much these things bother him and asks Grid's opinion. The protagonist asks to set aside the conversations and take him to where the Stripper is. The Count remembers that he sent a request for extermination against the Stripper to the Red Knights, so he does not care whether this person will succeed or not. He wonders how many pieces the Stripper will leave this arrogant man in. Later, in the basement, they confirm to Grid that this is the place. The Count reveals that about 800 knights, mercenaries, and wizards died trying to exterminate him. He also informs Grid that the space inside is very small, and therefore it is impossible to bring the entire battalion. The protagonist asks if this is true, how they could have imprisoned him there. The Count recounts that originally the Stripper was a human, and they did not need to bring him there, as he was already there. They simply closed the door. Seeing such an interesting and healthy creature in the slave market is not common, so he bought him. He wanted to know how many lashes he could endure before dying and compare it to what the peasants endure. The Count explains that he was very resilient, and thanks to him, he was able to enhance his skills to play longer with the other peasants. However, one day a peasant who was tied up next to him died, and the Stripper became furious like never before. Perhaps he knew that peasant, for after seeing him die, he immediately transformed into a monster. Then they locked him in that place, and later discovered that he was a kind of half-man, half-demon. The Count is tired of all the terrible rumors that have spread because of this monster and exclaims that if the protagonist is able to get rid of him, he will give him a reward. Grid receives the S+ rank mission to exterminate the Stripper. Count Sibra rejoices in torturing his slaves. One day, he bought from the slave market a half-man, half-demon individual and tortured him as one of his toys. This half-man, half-demon saw someone he had formed bonds with die in the slave market. After that, he transformed into a monster called the Stripper. Please exterminate the Stripper, a monster that seeks to kill all humans. The mission conditions are to kill the Stripper, and as rewards, he will receive black quartz earrings, but if he fails, he will lose 6 levels and his reputation will drop by 1,000 points. Grid reasons that it is better to get rid of this potential danger now, so he will accept the mission. But there is another thing that does not please him. The Count mentions that they will close the door as a precaution in case of emergency and asks Grid to notify them when he is finished. Grid equips his gear and remembers that Lowell said that Pawn, Regis, and Faker could complete this mission together, but he trusted that the protagonist could do it alone. Grid thinks it is not the time for that, but taking out the letter from his wife, he decides to read it to relax before the fight. Irene addresses the protagonist as Love and reveals that she is constantly worried about Grid's well-being. Grid reads the letter that his wife wrote with such care, and it seems that Irene wants the protagonist to be the first person to receive this great news. But Grid goes completely blank upon reading the letter. In the SA group facilities, they discuss the scheduled tasks for today, including the upcoming international competition. Then, one of the executives gives a strong blow and asks to set aside the agenda, demanding an explanation about the other matter. How is it possible that such an immature player as Grid managed to gain access to this precious event? He exclaims that this damned player sent hundreds of emails accusing them of manipulating the game and negatively affecting the crafting of their items. Although his colleague tries to reassure them and explains that he also thought like them at first, if they review the recent achievements, the protagonist not only improved his gameplay mechanics but also matured as a person, and, more importantly, the game qualified him as the most fit for the system. Satisfy concluded that Grid is capable of handling this. Then, a window informs the protagonist that Irene is pregnant. They congratulate Grid on his wife's pregnancy. For about a month now, I have been constantly feeling nauseous. When I went to see the doctor, he told me that these were early symptoms of pregnancy. I was immensely surprised to learn that I was blessed with a child from my beloved, wrote Irene in the letter. As the stripper advances towards Grid, the protagonist cannot assimilate the news that his wife is pregnant. Distracted by the news, he is hit by a kick from the monster. Grid cannot believe that he will have a child. Here we see the face of the stripper. In the Satisfy facilities, they question Director June about the creation system being something exclusive to mature players. They explain that the Satisfy creation system is different from simulation games, where players can get rid of their characters if they get bored. But since each NPC in Satisfy has human emotions, the system of creating a child in Satisfy is similar to raising a child in real life. His colleague reminds him that if players are irresponsible or abuse their children in the game, they could attract unwanted media attention and create a social problem. For this reason, marriage and child-rearing is a system reserved for a few qualified users who truly respect the NPCs. Director June recalls that there are users who are good in real life but are evil in the game. He explains that there is no way to assert that there is a correlation between a person's behavior in real life and their behavior in a video game. He remembers that Grid's actions are different and stand out from the rest. He may lack social skills in real life, but in the game, he is a completely different person. He opines that he is a person who has learned and developed in the world of Satisfy. Therefore, there is no player more qualified than him to receive the creation system. Moreover, the only qualification he has received so far is to be able to be a father. Having the potential to become a father and being a father are two distinct things. The colleagues do not know what Director June is referring to. He expresses that the opportunity is before the protagonist, but accepting to have a child and raise it requires a different level of determination. The protagonist is overwhelmed by the monster, while the windows ask if he is happy with the news of his wife's pregnancy. Not only that, this will be a very important decision for Grid, as he sees the NPCs as humans, said Director June, explaining that an important decision requires great determination. The protagonist tries to focus in front of the difficult opponent he has ahead and decides to think about the pregnancy after defeating this man. Then, the stripper attacks, but a window informs Grid that the birth of a child and its upbringing is a huge responsibility that requires great determination. Grid narrowly escapes the monster's attack, but the windows urge him to decide carefully. The protagonist is terrified of how realistic virtual reality can be. His feelings for Irene are also very real, but he is so impacted by the news that he cannot think clearly. But the monster takes advantage of the distraction and hits the protagonist in an opening. Grid curses himself for not having reacted in time to such simple movements and tries to focus again. He remembers that Irene always wanted to have a child as a result of their love. Grid wishes to celebrate this news with her. Thanks to Irene, the protagonist learned what love is, but he did not think that the result of that love would come so suddenly. Then, an idea crosses his mind. What if he does not accept? He remembers that his wife promised to protect this place so that Grid always has a home to return to. Grid also wants to help her. The protagonist stands firm in his base, wanting Irene to have everything she desires, but while he was distracted, the stripper lunges again. Grid thinks it is too late and that he will not be able to avoid the attack. But then, the stripper's attack is completely blocked, which surprises the monster, as he also did not expect this. It is Randy, who covered the protagonist because he was worried about Grid. On the ground, Grid thinks he would do the impossible if it were for Irene. However, this implies a new life, a child. It is definitely an immense responsibility. Grid doubts whether he should accept. He does not know if he has the necessary determination to become a father. Grid's fight against the stripper continues. The monster jumps to dodge Randy's sword and counterattacks as it falls. Randy easily withstands the monster and blocks the stripper's attacks with his great sword to protect Grid. Then, the stripper is unexpectedly hit on the side by Randy. This irritates the beast, which grabs the doppelganger by the head, but Randy manages to free himself and dodges the monster's horizontal strike. He then aims at the protagonist, who is still impacted by the news that he will be a father. Randy, in turn, leans against a wall of the cell to propel himself and saves the distracted Grid from the stripper again. Randy draws the attention of his companion, and Grid apologizes for being so distracted. Grid feels overwhelmed thinking about the things that will come in his future, but now he only needs to worry about his possible child. Grid forcefully intercepts the stripper and exclaims that now he only wants to celebrate with Irene the fruit of their love. However, Grid does not know if just celebrating will be enough. He continues to be distracted in the fight, and Randy saves him again from the monster. Randy can feel that his friend is not acting like usual and advises the protagonist to focus. Otherwise, he will get hurt. Grid knows that what Randy says is true. He cannot let his friend take care of everything and decides to concentrate once and for all. Then, Grid attacks the stripper, but it dodges the blow and positions itself in front of Randy. Grid is surprised by his rival's speed, and the protagonists cannot do anything in the face of the monster's imminent strike. The stripper lands its punch, sending both against the wall of the cell, and Randy apologizes to his companion. Grid recovers and mentions that it was not Randy's fault. While the doppelganger distracts the stripper, Grid reasons that the monster took advantage of them joining together to attack them. Then, the protagonist notices that steel plates have been placed outside the wall to contain the stripper. He assumes they are strong enough not to yield to its strength, so he plans something after seeing them and activates his Pagma's fencing dance. However, the protagonist is interrupted by an attack from the stripper. Randy attacks from behind to distract the monster while Grid takes a potion. The protagonist realizes that the area is so narrow that he cannot execute his sword dance properly, which is why Randy did not use his skills. Grid remembers that Lowell mentioned it would be complicated even for 3 members of the Overgeared clan. He is definitely not an easy opponent. The protagonist can see the eye patch that Lowell talked about so much, which is under the Ripper's mask. Grid can see the scars and wounds resulting from the torture the creature suffered. The Ripper is half human and half demon, an existence that can become human or demonic depending on the environment. Grid reasons that Randy and the Ripper are very similar, but there was a moment in their stories that changed the fate of both. The protagonist recalls the time he visited the cemetery with Elder Khan. The elder blacksmith thanks Grid for accompanying him and wishes that his son Oliver feels at peace seeing him next to Grid. The protagonist questions whether parents regret how they raised their children. Khan recounts that he often left Oliver alone in the forge when he was young, but he never complained or showed discontent regarding his father's actions. Khan reveals that he still does not know if he is qualified to be a father and exclaims that he did not deserve to have a son like Oliver. He laments not having taken better care of his deceased son. Meanwhile, Randy dodges an attack from the Ripper, blocks the monster's large mace with his sword, and manages to disarm the Ripper with a quick move. He shouts to Grid that it is the moment. The protagonist begins his sword dance, thinking that the Ripper is a demon born from the Count's cruelty. He reflects on how the presence of another person by his side would have changed how the Ripper developed. These thoughts begin to disturb the protagonist's mind again, who still doubts whether he will be a good father. The Ripper, in turn, does not give time for a response and uses the chains that imprisoned him as weapons, attacking our protagonists. Randy is hit by the chains, and Grid laments being too slow to activate his sword dance, distracted by his thoughts. The monster continues its offensive, using the chains as weapons and fiercely striking the protagonists. Grid has no time to perform his sword dance, and the windows inform that he is taking a lot of damage. The Ripper grabs his mace with the chains and prepares to finish the fight. This constant attack method to penetrate defenses is overwhelming Grid. The protagonist feels that his life is reaching its limit and has no time to heal. If he continues to take direct hits, he will not be able to defeat him. He already knew that humans were inferior. No's voice is heard. The cat jumps out of Grid's inventory to attack the Ripper, shouting that the secret weapon has arrived. No uses his soul ingestion on the monster and steals 1831 points of strength. He mocks Grid for not being able to handle something so insignificant due to his distraction, mentioning that being the best is not that difficult, but Grid likes to complicate things. He explains that doubts are taking over him because he analyzes the advantages and disadvantages too much. The protagonist remembers that Elder Khan told him that no one finds a task easy on the first try. The Elder commented that one day Grid would find a partner and they would have a child, but he should have more confidence in himself. The protagonist replied that it would be impossible for him to find a partner and satisfy, and said that having a child would be even more impossible, asking Khan if he still thought raising a child was difficult. The elder answers affirmatively and comments that he ended up becoming a failure as a father, although his son Oliver loved him despite his flaws. He remembers how Oliver would ask him not to be sad and would lie, saying he was fine, despite his illness. Oliver revealed that he really enjoyed the first time he followed his father to the forge, and when he returned on his own, everything seemed amazing to him. He did not want to lie to his father Khan, saying that all his memories are good, but he still loves all of them. There is no one who has been a perfect father on the first try. In my heart, I keep good memories, so don't blame yourself too much, his son Oliver asked. Elder Khan remembers that he was a father with many shortcomings, but if he meets his son Oliver in the next life, he will embrace him with the same joy he felt when he held him for the first time, taking care of him with all his strength. These are the first steps to becoming a great father, the elder revealed to Grid. Returning to the present, we see the protagonist's golden blades, which help Randy and block the Ripper's strikes. Randy thinks this will be enough time for his companion, and the Ripper has no time to react when he is completely hit by Grid's Pagma's swordsmanship assassination skill. The windows inform that the effect of the blue orichalcum of failure increases attack power by 30% in dark places and show that Grid equipped the great sword of the doppelganger as a secondary weapon, due to the purpose of using the dual sword style, applying only 50% of the weapon's attack power. No mentions that Grid is like a thick and disgusting piece of metal, but he likes his simplicity, so he will give him a gift and activates his soul ingestion ability again. Then, he gives the protagonist the strength he stole from the Ripper, and Grid makes a decision about being a father. He will welcome him with joy and do his best to protect him. The Ripper lets out a furious scream that awakens fear in those who hear it. The Ripper's keen eyes will penetrate through their weaknesses. Although the windows inform that Grid resisted, and the protagonist firmly supports his legs, a window asks again if he will joyfully accept the news of his wife's pregnancy. Grid exclaims that this is the beginning of fatherhood, so he will welcome it with open arms. With joy, he accepts his wife's pregnancy and asks her to choose a prenatal name for their child. In Korea, it is a name by which parents will refer to the baby until they give him his official name. At the time of birth, this name is usually related to what the parents hope for their future child. Grid prepares to defeat the Ripper while praying that fortune and prosperity will always be by his child's side. Wielding both swords, he uses the Assassin's Link skill, activating the effect of the Great Sword of the Doppelganger and increasing the damage of skills by 20%. He also activates the effect of Failure and the Holy Light Gauntlets, and several consecutive strikes are activated. As the Ripper is defeated, Grid decides that he will become a better person in the future, all for the future life that will be in his arms. We will see each other soon, jackpot. The protagonist decides to prenatally name his child after a great prize. We see that, on the other hand, in the Satisfy offices, they curse Grid for giving this prenatal name to the firstborn in the creation system in Satisfy. After defeating the Ripper, a window appears showing Grid's achievement of over 100 million experience points, acquiring 3 weapon enhancement stones and 1 blessed weapon enhancement stone. A third of the experience gained is equally distributed between No and Randy. The protagonist thinks that the battle was more complicated than he expected, but these two are finally yielding good results. Then, Grid also receives the Ripper's items as a reward, obtaining the eye patch and the Ripper's mask. Because of these two things, Grid was delayed by 10 days on his journey. The protagonist remembers that Lowell obtained this information from Reigns, the #1 monster evaluator in his ranking. Lowell was confident that the information was correct, as Reigns has the ability to predict what a monster will drop just by observing its characteristics. The protagonist notes that, by appearance, the Ripper's eye patch does not seem like much, but Lowell must have paid a lot of money to obtain this information from a ranker, and he can trust him. Thus, he activates his evaluation of the legendary blacksmith, and we discover that the Ripper's eye patch is of unique rank. The Ripper was tortured for a long time and was also forced to witness the torture of countless people, resulting in a great understanding of vital points. This ocular item was used by the Ripper for a long time and gained this ability. The vital point detection ability will be generated. Then, windows show that the legendary blacksmith's evaluation discovered a hidden characteristic in the evaluated item. This is an item that contains the Ripper's resentment. The user will be dominated by the impulse to kill and will become a reckless assassin. This surprises the protagonist, who deduces that it must be some terrible curse that will not allow its user to play normally. But this is different if Grid is the one who uses it. Upon putting on the eye patch, windows inform the protagonist that his hatred for humans is increasing. The desire to kill is flooding his entire being. But another window shows that Grid resisted this, delighting the protagonist, who will be able to use the item without problems. Grid thought the item would block his vision, but it seems that it does not work that way, and he decides to test his ability. Then, he observes Randy and No and can see a circle indicating the weak points of the creatures. It is not very precise, but Grid can see their vital points. Then, he grabs No's tail and questions whether this is really his weak point. No, in turn, screams and orders Grid to let him go, trying to hide his weak point, exclaiming that the best demon beast from hell has no weak points. Grid praises his strategist Lowell for managing to obtain such an item, which will help him surpass his limits as Pagma's successor. Vital point detection is a high-level skill that few combat classes possess. When a strike hits a vital point, the probability of dealing a critical hit increases, and it is also possible to inflict various abnormal states on the opponent, significantly increasing the user's combat power. The protagonist plans to use this item to enhance the armors at the vital points of the guild members. Although, on the other hand, he has not heard anything about the mask and wonders if it will be some junk item. It seems to be made of black iron, which is a material of excellent quality, but the design is horrible. Then, he activates his evaluation, and we see that it is a legendary rank item. It is a mask that reflects the Ripper's sadness, a being who lived a painful life before becoming a half-man, half-demon creature. The bloody tears of the evil spirit ability will be generated. Just like the eye patch, this item has no conditions for use. The evaluation also finds a hidden characteristic in the evaluated item. It is an item that contains the Ripper's resentment. The user will be dominated by the impulse to kill and will become a reckless assassin. Then, a window shows what the bloody tears of the evil spirit ability does. When the target is hit, there is an 8% chance of releasing a stream of blood. The expelled blood will paint the Ripper's mask. When this happens 10 times, the mask will turn red, at which point the user's attack power will increase by 50% for 5 seconds. This impresses Grid, who praises how incredible legendary items are. The protagonist assumes that not even Rains knew about this and exclaims that Lowell was lucky because otherwise, the information would have been more expensive. A window congratulates him on his wife's pregnancy and asks what kind of child he desires. The statistics and growth rate can be affected from the prenatal stage. Then, another window asks him to take care of his wife. The protagonist wishes that his child will not be like him, as he knows he lacks talent in many aspects. At the same time, he decides to continue his journey with the boys, asking Randy to rest in the inventory until he is called, and No to stay out a little longer. The protagonist calls for the door to be opened and thinks that if his child has to resemble someone, he only has one person in mind. A radiant personality, a generous heart, and one of the first people to trust him. He wishes for his child to be like Irene and is happy that Irene is his wife. When they open the cell door, both Count Sibra and his henchmen are surprised. When they confirmed it to him, he thought it was a lie. He did not believe that the protagonist could really defeat that monster without help. Stepping out of the cell, Grid informs that he has already killed the Ripper. "Do you have my reward ready?" he asked with a smile that frightened those present. The Count responds affirmatively and hands him the black quartz earrings, which increase intelligence by 15%. Considering this was an S+ rank mission, the reward does not convince Grid much, as his intelligence already exceeds 1,000 points. Thanking his titles, he decides to sell them after finding a craftsman who can make accessories with purple orichalcum. The protagonist still has something important to do and exclaims that many people have suffered because of Count Sibra's hobbies. The Count does not understand why he should care about insignificant beings and opines that they are mere worms that are born, develop, and die in the trash. Asking the protagonist for some bread, he tells him to forget the worms and invites him to watch them suffer together. However, the protagonist rejects the offer, as he does not have a hobby like that. By the way, I bet a good number of swords could pierce your immense body. If you really want to have a hobby like this, you should also enjoy losing a bit of that fat, said the protagonist mockingly, and then he leaves, leaving a bad impression on the Count. Sibra thinks that Grid is a very unpleasant guy. Then, he turns and asks if they are already here. We see that the Black Arrow squad has appeared and is at the Count's disposal. Sibra has a mission for the assassins who have never failed a murder since they started working for the Count's family. Follow the man who was here a few moments ago, kill him, and bring me back the black quartz earrings, ordered Count Sibra. He planned for the Ripper to be killed by the Red Knights and had no intention of handing over his family's relic to a stranger. Thus, Grid will pay for these words with his life. We see that the assassins accept the Count's order. Then, the Count turns to his two henchmen, who respond to their master's call. The Count mercilessly strikes them, exclaiming that they did nothing while his precious earrings were stolen right before his eyes. What were you doing while that arrogant idiot killed the monster? You should have killed him with traps, even if you died in the process, the furious Count exclaimed. Don't think you'll get away unscathed after your poor performance. Don't even dream of getting home in one piece tonight, threatened the Count, striking them as he vented. We see a creature emerge from the shadows. The Count is quickly injured by the creature, with no time to react, covering his face and questioning what the hell that was. Here it is revealed that it was Noah who tasted human blood for the first time. Then, the Count realizes that the cat has a horn and deduces that it must be a monster. The cat begins to fly and scratches the defenseless Count. The Count reprimands his followers for failing to protect the castle's security, allowing a monster to enter so easily. He orders them to capture the cat or they will be killed later. The Count removes his robe to scare the cat away, which calmly leaves the area. The Count is extremely irritated and insults his followers for being so useless, allowing a cat to scratch him. Unexpectedly, he is attacked by his own followers, questioning what the hell they are doing. The boys exclaim that they are not worms and will not allow the Count to kill their families. The Count tries to backtrack and mentions that if they put away their swords, he will reward them. But that night, a scream filled the palace. A girl was able to see the scene from outside, wondering if this was what her companion had in mind. Kiki and Veridin, the necromancer, reveal that they did not plan all of this. They just wanted to obtain the Ripper's bones. The protagonist used the cat to incite the guards to kill the Count. Veridin did not think Grid would be capable of acting that way. Kiki exclaims that it is a serious matter, as a high-ranking noble has been murdered. They will send an investigation team. Moreover, the Count's son is still young and has his own problems related to his father. Kiki deduces that a bloodbath is coming among the factions that wish to become the new Count. The White Wolf clan's base is in these lands because of Grid, and these lands are about to plunge into chaos. The protagonist is now considered an enemy. Kiki proposes to report everything to the superiors, but Veridin denies the proposal, explaining that they will capture the soldiers who killed the Count and take credit to increase their influence. He proposes to put a hollow shell as the lord of these lands to take possession of the Sibra County at once. If you cling to just a small tree, you won't be able to see the entire forest of possibilities behind it. I only have gratitude for the bait that made all this possible, said Veridin, referring to Grid. Thanks to him, he will be able to offer these lands to his master, Agnes. Randy asks the protagonist why he punishes bad people, surprising him. Randy continues asking if it is because the protagonist is a good person. The protagonist explains that it would not be correct to describe himself as a good person, murmuring that the reason he usually helps people is not because he likes them, but because he wants some benefit from them. Although there are some exceptions, like that Count from moments ago, that type of person does not deserve to live. Grid thinks that killing him would put his position in the Eternal Kingdom at risk, as well as a possible future war. Moreover, he mentioned that if he left everything as it is, it would be much harder for his mission in search of Asmol, so he left everything in Noah's hands. Still, he does not regret killing that Count. Then Grid is attacked from behind, but is protected by the Blades of Pabranium, the group of assassins that the Count sent. They cannot believe that the protagonist noticed their perfect stealth. Grid dodges the low-tier assassins trying to kill him and reveals that his perception exceeds 1,400 points. He curses the Count for giving him the chance to summon the assassins, and furthermore, he says it was a terrible idea to follow their master's orders. The Pabranium blades fly at high speed and hit a weak point of one of the assassins, causing a critical damage of 1590. Grid reasons that, despite hitting a vital point, the damage is minimal. Clearly, he needs more Pabranium. He thinks that he cannot use the Pabranium properly unless he can get more pieces of the mineral in the western region. The assassins curse the golden blades, thinking that there must be some high-level assassin hiding somewhere controlling them, and order to be on alert. Grid takes advantage of the situation and orders Facker to kill them. This frightens the assassins, who prepare for combat. Seeing the blades flying from above, they deduce that the assassin accompanying Grid must be hiding above them, but they are wrong and are pierced by Grid's blacksmith fury. The protagonist calculates that the average level of these assassins seems to be around 240, and if he defeats them all, he could level up to 288. Even if he invests all the stat points he will gain from leveling up into agility, he will not have reached his goal. The protagonist's strength is at 2,810 points, while his agility is at 1,606 points. Before meeting Piero, he put all the stat points he gained into strength, and that is why the difference between these two stats does not seem to decrease. Here we see the assassins attacking the protagonist by throwing a multitude of daggers. Grid's goal is to have a 1-to-1 ratio between his strength and agility, and he questions whether he will have to level up 120 times to achieve that goal. At the same time, Grid deflects the daggers with his sword and orders Randy and Noah to attack, but Noah tries to trick his new friend into petting him on the chin instead of helping Grid. The protagonist knows he must level up while training his skills, and for that reason, he cannot waste time. He quickly finishes off the assassins and will make the most of the time in the 2 weeks it will take to reach his destination. Grid is impatient to reach Titan, the capital of the Empire. Meanwhile, in Count Sibra's castle, we see that they have captured the 2 guys who ended the Count. They try to apologize, saying that the Count tortured them and exercised his tyranny freely. Here the identity of Edon, 23 years old, the 31st Knight of the Red Knights and the youngest among them, is presented. He thanks the boys for cooperating with the investigation and orders the execution of these men and their families. The boys are unhappy because Edon promised to spare their families if they cooperated. "I thought about it and concluded that you would feel very lonely if you were the only ones to die," said the Red Knight, allowing the boys to see their families in the afterlife. The Count's henchmen are taken away while they scream for mercy. Edon asks Veridin if he was the one who captured them, and the player responds affirmatively. The Red Knight mentions that Veridin was very lucky, as he simply passed by when he saw how they killed Count Sibra, and that is why he captured them. Veridin blames himself, as if he had arrived earlier, he might have been able to save the Count. The Knight asks if he really knows nothing about the person who killed the Ripper. The Necromancer explains that he only knows what he heard from the soldiers, but it seems that it is a man with black hair who travels alone and has a killer's aura around him. Edon reasons that the main reason they sent him there was to deal with the disaster caused by the Ripper, but it seems that things have complicated. His superiors will be upset if he cannot gather more information. He feels that the Ripper's murderer and the Count's murder are somehow connected, but Veridin is pretending not to know anything. Edon has no doubt that this man is involved in this incident, and the fact that he decided not to tell anything bothers him. Meanwhile, we head to the great city of Raydan, where someone is surprised to have arrived in the city of Lord Grid. The boy has visited all kinds of cities, but this is the one that impressed him the most. He estimates that there must be at least 100,000 residents living here and thinks that being a duke is really amazing. He did not think they could manage a city like this. This is Damian, who has been wanting to meet Grid again. Someone approaches Damian, surprised that another visitor has arrived. "I think it would be a waste to let you in easily," exclaimed Piero, asking for the identity of the outsider. Damian identifies the man as a farmer and does not remember doing anything that could have angered him. Then, he deduces that Piero must have read the phrases he wrote on his armor, demonstrating the love he has for Rebecca's daughters and wishing the world would understand his feelings. He introduces himself as a common paladin serving the Church of Rebecca and questions the farmer if he has any problem with him. Piero asks Damian to stop lying and expresses that he does not seem like a common paladin. This comment irritates Damian, who finally introduces himself as an otaku paladin. Then, Piero proposes a duel, feeling that Damian's divine power is superior to that of any member of the clergy he has met so far. This catches the swordsman's attention. Damian, in turn, is impressed that a farmer detected the magnitude of his divine power. Moreover, he believes that the man must be a citizen driven mad by pressure and prays that the blessing of the goddess's light can heal Piero's illness. The agent of the goddess has no time to waste and needs to ask Lord Grid to seal Leifel's spear as quickly as possible to save Isabel at all costs. He feels a truly overwhelming presence and manages to draw his shield in time to protect himself from an unexpected attack from the farmer. Piero strikes hard, without warning, but the boy manages to protect himself. Damian steps back, not understanding how the farmer could exert such pressure against the strongest paladin of Rebecca's church with a simple hoe. He is stunned by the blow and questions who the hell that man is. Piero, in turn, is also surprised that the boy was able to block the attack. He cannot believe that there are people around who cannot be subdued by the Empire. During the time he spent with Duke Grid, Piero's body finally recovers. The farmer introduces himself as Piero, praises the boy's excellent defense, and proposes to fight him using his unparalleled fencing skills. "If you want to enter Ray Dan, you will have to defeat me," said Piero, proposing to start the duel. Damian finds it absurd. It makes no sense for a farmer to be the guardian of the entrance. Another strong presence catches Damian's attention. Another person appears on the scene with a loud explosion. The boy murmurs that it is a surprise and thought he would find Damian there. He describes Damian as the paladin class user of Rebecca who was underestimated by everyone but managed to reach second place in the paladin ranking. Although he suddenly disappeared from the ranking, and rumors say he obtained a hidden class. It must be Damian, Kraugel supposed, appearing on the scene. The paladin is completely surprised, asking if he is in front of Kraugel, the first place in the unified ranking. Kraugel expresses that during these 2 weeks he thought he formed a special bond with Piero and until yesterday managed to reduce his health by half. But Kraugel is disappointed with Piero for secretly training with an opponent of that caliber, a comment that irritates Damian. But Kraugel asks to train against Damian. Piero explains that it is also the first time he meets Damian, but he cannot avoid it at this point. He calls Damian, who responds shyly. "Choose one of us to fight first," offered the farmer. Damian stammers, expressing that he does not want to fight and wonders what kind of place Raydan is. Then we head to Ubadakan, in the Haken Kingdom. Here, 275 members of a clan with an average level of 230 gather and order to wear masks and helmets to conceal their identity. Among them, there are at least 100 ranked in the top 1,000 of the unified ranking. The ideal moment has finally arrived to use our incredible strength. "Our target is the base of the Overgeared clan, the city of Raydan," shouted Cyval, second place in the unified ranking, master of the Snake clan, and count of the Haken Kingdom. Cyval exclaims that Grid humiliated them in the international competition, and after becoming a duke following the event of the Golem invasion, moments in the past, the Snake clan discussed how they could not ignore Grid, who is rapidly rising in the ranking and will be an obstacle to achieving their goals. Asuka expresses that even if they wanted to, they cannot do anything, as the Overgeared clan has members in the top 10 and top 40 of the unified ranking. They cannot defeat them. Vox, in turn, explains that a barrier is useless if it is not in the right place, and Asuka does not understand his companion. Vox explains that, according to their scouts, Grid's whereabouts are unknown, and the clan members have abandoned their city to explore the mines. Raydan is just an empty house at the moment. Vox mentions that it is foreign territory, so they will not be able to occupy the city, but it is a perfect opportunity to destroy its interiors and delay its development. Asuka thinks it is dangerous for the Snake clan to do this alone, and Cyval murmurs that they are not the only ones who consider Grid a nuisance and will make some arrangements. Returning to the present, Cyval exclaims that Grid's castle is empty and there is no one in the city, so they have guaranteed victory. "We will not go alone. We formed an alliance," reveals Cyval, shouting. The 7 main clans have united to take down Grid. Elsewhere in Satisfy, we see another of the 7 great clans, Iceflower, one of the 7 main clans, a small clan with about 30 members, but all are elites who are in the top 100 of the wizard ranking. The master of this clan is Vondre, the first place in the wizard ranking. He was humiliated during the international competition, and his unified ranking fell from 11th to 17th due to the pressure from the Overgeared clan. Filled with rage, Vondre dedicated all his time, money, and effort to obtaining rank S magic. Now he is notably stronger than when he participated in the international competition. Excited, Vondre exclaims that he will destroy all of Grid's territory and, in 9 months, during the second international competition to be held in his homeland France, he will defeat the protagonist in 3 seconds. The clan members think their master has definitely gone mad. They then ask the master to stop, as they detected movement in the forest. Apparently, they found refugees, hundreds of them, and curse them for interrupting their path to Raydan. Vondre proposes to kill them all, but his companion asks him to calm down, as if they kill so many people, their bad reputation will increase, and they won't be able to play for a long time. Then Vondre activates his magic to fly, and his companion does not understand what his master is planning. Vondre proposes to fly across the forest, as he is not willing to delay their advance when they are so close to Raydan. Then everyone activates their flying magic. Although it is a waste of mana, one of the clan members is attacked by surprise. They ask Vondre to stop, as his companion Ren was hit, and the culprit disappeared instantly. In this, a window informs Vondre that the member Ren from his group has died. Vondre attacks the ground, ordering the bastard to show himself. His attack causes a large explosion, but when the smoke dissipates, he can only see Ren's corpse at the site. Then another window informs that another member of the group has died. They are being attacked from one side, and they assume it must be an assassin, and assassins are the counters to wizards. Moreover, they are in an area full of shadows. As they are at a disadvantage in this location, they activate their speed skill and quickly escape. Then they are attacked by blades coming from all directions and decide to activate their shields. Although they seem useless against the blades that nullify magic, more members die in the attack. The windows keep informing of more casualties in the clan. It is a true massacre, and they order to use any method to escape. This seems futile, and the clan is completely annihilated. Vondre realizes who could take down 11 elite wizards in just 5 minutes, except for him, who is at level 303. The other wizards are all above level 200. Vondre only has one person in mind and screams asking how they knew they would attack Raydan from this area. He orders the assassin Faker to respond, and here the assassin reveals himself, having no intention of answering, saying that everyone will die there, although inside he thinks it is a coincidence. He did not expect to find them on this detour he took to avoid the Empire. Vondre lands, cursing the assassin, charging a spell, revealing that he came with the intention of destroying every last insect related to Grid, said in anger. Faker manages to react in time and dodges the Ice Dragon's Fury skill. The attack causes a large explosion and freezes a large part of the battlefield. Vondre, in turn, laughs, exclaiming that it was one of the rank S spells he learned. Although Faker will prove it before Grid. The assassin feels that Vondre's spells are dangerous, but on the other hand, they must have a huge mana consumption. Then Faker leans on the ground, but the ice manages to destabilize him a bit. Faker is surprised because the guy also froze the bushes to use them as traps. His combat analysis is impressive. In this, Vondre already knew that the Overgeared guys had reached their 3rd class advancement, but he did not think they would be so fast. Although he exclaims that if Faker has no place to hide, he is just a cockroach against him. The assassin has no means to hide in the environment, and there are more and more pillars limiting his movement. The Ice Wizard orders his companions to attack as well, saying that if an assassin cannot hide, it is useless. With the attacks directed at Faker, he exclaims that the assassin will fall before Raydan. But in this, Faker concentrates and activates a skill with which he can dodge all attacks with unmatched speed and agility while taking out one of the wizards. Vondre is impressed with Faker's performance, who did not decrease his speed despite the cold, and has absolute control over that overwhelming speed. Faker completely masters his speed and instantly takes out another group of wizards. The assassin wears armor that normally increases agility by 6% and movement speed by 12%. But since it was forged by Grid, it further increases the stats. Vondre compares Faker's control with that of Kraugel himself and does not know how they became so strong. Master of Speed is a 3rd advanced class that seeks supreme control. To achieve it, this advanced class had a great synergy with Grid's items, resulting in a significant increase in Faker's combat power. The wizards have no time to cast spells due to the assassin's daggers and think this is similar to cheating. Vondre orders the use of magic stored in the orbs, but the wizards think of saving them for Raydan. Even so, Vondre orders them to use them, or they will all die here. Faker feels something big is coming, and the wizards instantly cast the spells stored in their orbs, prematurely celebrating for having hit the assassin. However, one companion does not believe it. They only hit a residual image and are unaware of the whereabouts of the true body. Vondre orders his companions to retreat and activates his double casting, ready to capture the cockroach that has been running. He combines 2 spells, and then Faker is captured in the Ice Mage's skill. Vondre celebrates his achievement, as now Faker will not be able to use his tricks. The assassin is completely trapped in ice but causes a large explosion that blinds the wizard's vision. Vondre exclaims that it is pathetic to use smoke bombs when one is about to die, but his companion warns him about something. Faker has completely disappeared without a trace. They think he must have hidden in the ground and decide to use their detection magic to find him. However, they are completely overwhelmed when they feel he has arrived from behind. Vondre will not die so easily, but he is eliminated with a move from the assassin. Faker remembers that Grid asked about the other item, and the assassin replied that he wore this armor because he did not want to be distracted by using other things, ending Vondre. Faker advises not to let their guard down, especially if they are not sure their target is dead. We see that Faker used the hood to completely conceal his presence. Meanwhile, we head to another place in Satisfy. We find ourselves at the entrance of Patreon, where they ask what is happening. The guilds that united to invade Raydan order the castle gates to be opened. Then someone asks why they are heading west, although the players do not want to answer. The guild master orders them to step aside so he can respond. It is Bubit, with the Crusher class, the 32nd place in the unified ranking and master of the Jack Guild. He explains that they are just hunting and thinks an interrogation is excessive. The NPC continues saying that he does not care if it is excessive, they just have to answer with the truth. Bubit cannot believe how this guy is exerting so much pressure. He does not know who the hell he is. They joined with the Seraph Guild, with 200 members, to attack Raydan from this direction. They felt humiliated during the international competition, but they will not be able to pass through Patreon to Raydan because of this guy. Bubit exclaims that if no answer satisfies the guy, they will have to force their way through Patreon. But the NPC responds that he has already confirmed the true intention of the players using the special orb that is in this area. Releasing an overwhelming pressure, he exclaims that these lies remind him of a miserable person he knows. He explains that, unfortunately for them, there is someone valuable to him living in the lands to which the players are heading. Bubit feels an overwhelming pressure and decides to withdraw of his own accord. Otherwise, his remains will stay in this city that he protects. Exclaimed Count Asur, Lord of the City of Patreon. If you don't want to miss the upcoming releases, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. I look forward to seeing you in the next Nerd Recap.